control, shoveling dirt in every hole. Predators to condemn your soul, watching you and watching me. We're all connected but separated, misunderstood and so frustrated. A million armies of one have invaded, watching you and watching me. We live behind glass curtains and act like nothing's wrong. Soon you will belong. I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye, we're the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. We the people have taken over. We the people are little brother, standing by to dethrone each other, watching you and watching me. Paranoid, the lens is our weapon, desensitized in our lust for attention, democratized by our voyeur obsessions, watching you and watching me. Slaves to perfection, don't let them project you as you are. Reveal your every flaw. I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye, we're the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. I know you're out there somewhere. This is the new totalitarian state. 1,000 eyes are waiting for you to break. Stay in line, don't make a mistake. We're watching. We watched you for so long. We wait for you to fall. We will expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me.
Let your experience begin right now. From high atop the mountains of British Columbia to you listening around the world, this is Spaced Out Radio. You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, on Twitter, @SpacedOutRadio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. You can follow us on Instagram, Dave Scott, SOR, or on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride as we are live on Spaced Out Radio.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The deeper I go, the deeper I fall.
Good evening and welcome to Space Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Good to have you along for the ride as we welcome you in to listening in at spacedoutradio.com, on Spreaker, and on Revolution Radio as we welcome you to tonight's show as we broadcast live out of Uncle Jimbo's cabin right here in the Great White North. As we are live on this Thursday night, early Friday morning, if you are on the East Coast, good to have you around. Here at Spaced Out Radio, we do this thing 3 hours a night, 7 days a week, because we want to be your official one-stop shop when it comes to the supernatural, the paranormal, the cryptozoological, the spiritual, and so much more. The guitar god himself, Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses, is the official music of Spaced Out Radio. He is the official sound. You can click on his banner on our website. Hey, follow us on Twitter, @SpacedOutRadio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, you can follow me at Dave Scott, SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Find us on TuneIn. Download our shows from iTunes, and our website is spacedoutradio.com. At this time, we say hi, how are you to everyone listening in on the Revolution Radio chat room on the High Plains Talk Radio Network, in the Spaced Out Radio chat room on Spreaker, along with our fans on Facebook at Euphoria Chronicles, Chronicles of the Unknown, Forest Moon Paranormal, and our flagship chat room, the SOR Space Travelers. If you haven't signed up for the SOR Space Travelers Club yet, it is time. It's only $5 a month, and with that, your name gets entered in a monthly prize draws. You get access to private group interviews, access to a special section on our website, and much more. Hey, we're going to give you a hell of a lot more than just access to our archives. While on our website, you can read up on our latest blogs, check out our SOR Space Wire from Eric Markham. And if you've had a weird sighting or experience you can't explain, fill out an SOR Sightlines report. Our researcher, Mike Schmidt, is waiting for you. All your information is 100% confidential. Remember, if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, the Double R Machine is the largest nonprofit online radio station going today. Do us a favor, take the time to visit freedomslips.com and donate today. We've all heard of the dark side of the moon. Thank you, Pink Floyd. Yet for many of us, we don't want to believe that there is a dark side of the government. It's interesting to see why, and interesting as well. We take people like Randy Kramer or the recently deceased Max Spears and other basic ex-military people. We classify them as lunatics, off the wall. We hear their stories about black ops, secret space programs, time travel, and that we've been to Mars, and we say, what movie did you watch? So, some of these stories are so interesting and intriguing that many of us actually want to believe them. The stories sound so believable, yet in a weird sort of way, it's romantic. Because the secret is so Hollywood and so Star Wars or Star Trek. But is it real? Well, apparently there are a few out there who are in the know. Who remembers Ben Rich saying, "We've already got the technology to get ET home again"? Or the confirmations from high-ranking officials in Laura Eisenhower that her great-granddaddy Ike met ETs in the 50s and traded humans for technology. Sean David Morton is a talented psychic and remote viewer. He's a radio host, and he's been investigating Black Ops and more so Area 51 for the better part of 2 decades. Sean has a very popular radio show right here on the Double R Machine. And with that, we welcome Sean David Morton to Spaced Out Radio tonight. Sean, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time.
Hi, Dave. How are you? You can hear me?
I can hear you just fine. You're sounding beautiful. Beautiful.
Thank you. Let me turn this up a little bit because I can't hear you. So,
all right,
there we go. Testing. Thank you so much for that. You have so much energy into all of this. It's fantastic and amazing. So, congratulations. As I said, you and I both are great and grand lovers of talk radio, and it's always great to hear somebody who does it well.
Well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. I do have to start off with a little bit of a weird story.
Okay, please.
Went Bigfooting today because there's a lot of Bigfoot sightings in my area.
Cool.
And so me and our investigator at Space Out Radio, Mike Schmidt, we went out. We took my little guy who's 3. And as working from energy and being intuitive yourself, I'm still learning my game here, and I've been learning for the last 5 years, and I still don't understand it. But when you get that feeling that all of a sudden you start getting those cold shivers for no reason, and you feel like something is trying to communicate with you?
Yes.
Okay, so we're driving through the bush, and I got these shivers going on, and Mike's noticing them. I said, they're around. They're totally around. So we go to this one area where we had found tracks before, couldn't get there because there was like trees. We got a windstorm happening up here, and there's trees all around the road. And so we couldn't get through the trees. So we back up. We go to back to the area where I was getting the shivers. We walk back up into the area, and all of a sudden I get this message. We can see you, but we are not coming out because we don't want to scare your little guy.
Oh, my. Okay.
So here we were trouncing through the woods, and that message...
trouncing or flouncing?
Oh, either or. Whatever you're more comfortable with. And so basically, here we are going through the woods and, get this message. But the odd time we would hear the heavy thump of a like somebody hitting the ground pretty hard. So we heard a few of those. That was the strange sounds that a couple people were saying. Are you going to hear any sounds? Well, that's what we heard today. But as for anything else, they weren't showing themselves, probably because, like I said, it didn't seem that they were too comfortable with my little guy being around, and he was more interested in playing Hot Wheels than he was, looking for Bigfoot. But that's okay. Right. So then, tonight, about half an hour ago, I got a text message from my wife. Uh-huh. Her and my son are upstairs because my studio is downstairs in my house. And my son all of a sudden looks towards our kitchen doorway that leads to the hallway to the bedrooms. And he's just staring there looking at it. My wife looks at him, looks over at the doorway, and she said there was a tall being standing there. And it had the dark, blackish blue eyes, and it was resonating a purple. And then all of a sudden it just kind of faded away.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
That's the kind of stuff that happens around our lair around here, way up in the middle of
you guys are in, you're up there in British Columbia, right? You're way out in the woods up there, and it's some amazing power vortexes there. The legend is that the one of the communication vortexes, supposedly for the Archangel Gabriel, is supposed to be in Banff. Have you ever been over to Banff?
I have, and it's a beautiful area. Beautiful area.
And the angelic stuff is supposed to be in Banff. I traveled through that area. This is a very odd thing in college. I dated a lovely girl who was a Calgary Stampede Queen, which is the closest you have to royalty actually in Canada.
Pretty much.
And and so we drove all the way from Calgary, actually all the way across Canada, over all the way to Victoria Island where her dad lived. And it was some of the most. We went up to Banff. It was in the summer, and we went up to the ski resort up there, and went up to all these amazing places all through there. And it's you live in just an absolutely stunning, amazing area. And one of the things what I was looking for, and I'm hoping to be able to find it here, but there were 2 new Bigfoot videos that, just because you're talking about Bigfoot, that oddly enough were, strange place to find them, but they were on the Sorcia Fall website. And one of them is so interesting because it's a camera shot. I'm trying to find it for you here, but it's if I actually find it in the list of these Sorcia Fall things here, but it's an eagle cam, and it's just looking at a nest of eaglets, I guess you would call it. And in the background, underneath the nest, there's this Bigfoot jumping around that was actually caught on the camera. And so that's kind of fun because that lasts for about 5 minutes or so, where this Bigfoot's just bouncing from tree to tree and just is under the nest for whatever reason. And then there's another one that it was the story of a woman who was a Bigfoot that was civilized or something. I forget what her name was, but Zuma or whoever it was. But it was some of the Bigfoot footage that was taken by the famous Russians, the group of Russian explorers that were actually tracking the Bigfoot that were all murdered. Do you ever see that documentary?
Yes,
the 9 of them that were all killed.
The Dyatlov Pass.
Yes, exactly. So they had some more video from the Dyatlov Pass stuff, and I was trying to find it here, and that's a great story. The theory. You want to talk about Bigfoot for a little while?
We can talk about anything. Let's just roll with it tonight, man.
Okay.
I'm pretty laid back tonight.
Well, here's the cool part about it. In the Ojibwa shaman, and I was very close friends with the speaker of the Hopi clan, grandfather Thomas Banyakia, and he and I traveled around the world and did some interesting things together. And another guy named John Two-Birds, who was an Ojibwa shaman, and we went and investigated some interesting Bigfoot stuff. And there's a theory about the Bigfoot, and the theory is that if you look. And once again, these are just theories on this. I've never seen a Bigfoot or I'm not a contactee, abductee, or any kind of E. I've interviewed so many people, though. I mean, just hundreds of hours of videos of people all over the world who have had these various experiences. But okay, so here's what the Native American shaman were saying is that the Bigfoot were the first man. And if you actually look in the Bible, it's kind of interesting because man is actually created, male and female creates he, them. They're actually created on the 6th day in the first chapter of Genesis. And so, I call them the chopped liver people because then in the second chapter, the Elohim, those who come from the sky, say, well, we're not really happy with the human beings that we've created. We want to create something that looks more like us. So, to which the people that were created on the 6th day go, hey, what am I, chopped liver? And so my theory is that, and this is what these shaman were actually talking about, was that the Bigfoot was created as the first man, and their legends of him and her are that these creatures were initially the gardeners of the planet. And they have the ability, the reason nobody's ever caught one or the reason they can't, catch one is that they actually have a very interesting ability, which then jibes with the eyewitness accounts of them, that they have the ability quite possibly to open and close doors between realities or travel interdimensionally. And when you gather a group of Bigfoot stories, the interesting part about the Bigfoot is that there is electromagnetic phenomenon that goes along with them. The majority of it comes from people that spot them in headlights crossing roads, for example, up in the neighborhood you live, where the Bigfoot will stop, and then there's people actually claim there's like an ozone smell to the air, and that when the Bigfoot stops, they frizz up like a cat. And when that happens, the car battery in the car goes out, all the electrics go out completely in the car. And the Bigfoot, usually runs away. Maybe he thumps the top of the car or what have you. But and other people who claim that the Bigfoot has been responsible for, messing around with their motorhomes or whatever else. But they always claim that there's an electromagnetic phenomenon that's actually combined with the Bigfoot, which then goes along with the attitude of these shaman who say that yes, they travel between dimensions and they're the gardeners of the planet, and they were the first man. And it wasn't until the sky people decided to go, put some extra DNA in there and do something about it. And I'll see in the break or something, I'll try to find the. I was just looking at the other day actually this new Bigfoot footage that's out there. So anyway, that's just kind of an interesting explanation for some of the Bigfoot phenomenon and the the reality of that. So and we used to have a lot of weird stuff happen because I worked summers in college, we went up to Forks, Washington, which is in the Olympia National Forest, which is really weird because that's where the whole Twilight thing is now set. Stephanie Miller's Twilight. But we worked as lumberjacks up in that area, and worked for a company called Nielsen's that said, well, basically we lose about 2 guys a year. So 2 out of maybe 20 of you are probably going to be dead by the end of the summer. And which is true. My buddy Craig Crump got whacked with a choker bell. My another friend of mine had a tree fall and break his leg in 3 places. We had a guy named Mark Dixon who had his hand caught in a chain, and we had to yank him, and it pulled off his whole middle finger. And I think myself and my buddy Joe Lyons were the only 2 that came out of that entire experience unscathed. But some very weird things happen in the forest when you're out there, and I definitely think that there are things. There are definitely things that go bump in the night, especially in your area, because you really are the Great White North, and it must be nice for you because now it's starting to snow again, and you can rebuild your igloo. Because don't most Canadians their houses melt and they just kind of wander the tundra like buffalo in the summer?
Usually, and we use the bear skins and the moose hides for warmth and blankets. I got my sled team all ready.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm not going to lie, I have seen snowflakes twice already this year, but nothing too much to stick. That'll probably happen around the end of this month, and then everything will be white until mid-April, and then all of a sudden one day you wake up and it's all gone. But this area where I live, literally, Sean, we are sitting on top of a volcano. And it's been dormant for over 1 million years, and I just learned this actually this summer. I've only been up here for a year. I used to live down by Vancouver. But I was saying to a friend, because I'm looking around and I'm seeing all these lava rocks around, and I'm like, what's with all the pumice rocks? And he goes, well, this is volcanic area here. And it makes sense because we're on Volcano Alley right down to California. Yeah. So it makes sense. But this area here, I think in my vicinity, if I were to drive within I'm going to say a 50-mile radius, we have something like over 1,000 lakes in a very small area. And the ley lines, according to people I've talked to, just create this amazing energy around here where everything happens. This is probably one of the most haunted places I've ever lived in, this whole town. Not only that, we have a plethora of Bigfoot sightings annually, and nobody really talks about that. Right. And do you know who Miriam Delicato is?
I don't.
Okay, Miriam has one of the best recorded ET abductions. Out there. It happened in 1988. Well, when I moved here a year ago, I was chatting with her. I said, hey, I just moved to this small town. And she's like, hey, say hello to my friends when you see them. And I said, is this where it happened? And she goes, yes, it does. And it's funny, the community of 2,000, I would say maybe only about 100 of them know her story. Yeah. But there's so much weird activity around here. Example, what happened tonight with my wife. It just happens. So, we're right in the middle of whatever is here, and damn it, I got to find out. I just got to find the time to do that.
Oh, do you think it's well, I mean, you guys are, you guys are all up in the place where the gods still roam free.
Oh, absolutely. In my backyard, at any time, I could have grizzly bears, black bears, moose, cougars, anything. I got deer in my backyard. I've had deer in my backyard fighting, locked antler to antler. It's a great, great place living in the middle of the wilderness here, man.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I hope you obviously maintain your connection with the rest of the world by doing the radio show and by doing the, being involved through the web. But it really is. It's interesting because Canada really is taking their whole big article in The Economist this month about how Canada is supposedly leading the way to freedom now, and is much more free than the United States, and that so many people are moving up there, to get the kind of freedom you don't have here. But is that how you feel up there? Do you feel, who's going to bother you? I mean, some government guy comes along and and
No.
gives you crap? Obviously not, right?
Yeah, you know what? I'll be honest with you. This is the police are everywhere because the RCMP are our paramilitary force, okay?
Right,
And
yeah.
they have stations in every town. And this is you get into the more major sections, they crack down a little bit more because there is the gang problems, especially in the marijuana trade.
Right.
Coming up here, and they trade it straight across for heroin or cocaine, and that's usually down in the Vancouver area. But once you start getting out more into the wilderness and away from the population, everybody is just relaxed, and it's the way life is supposed to be. Like, everybody just lives to, go camping or fishing or hunting or ATVing or motorbiking, and, the highways around here are like those car commercials where you see the vehicle just driving for miles on an endless mountain road. That's what it's like around here, to be honest with you. And, a lot of people, though, when it comes to the immigration, we have a liberal government in here right now who is very, very open to allowing people to come in. The problem that a lot of Canadians are having right now, especially the second, third, fourth, fifth generation Canadians are having, is where the people are coming from. Okay, like for instance, we're accepting of the people of Syria coming in here because they have nothing to go home to. But there's a lot of Canadians who have the same answer as I do. Why are we have no problem opening the doors because that's what we do as being Canada. But explain to us why our taxpayers' dollars are going towards that when the top 5 Muslim nations in the world haven't taken a single refugee.
Of course not. Yeah, of course not. Yeah.
So that is probably one of the bigger issues around here, and then there's what's happening in Alberta with the oil crisis, and they're not producing enough oil because, well, who knows why. I don't really follow the oil story. I probably should a little bit more, but for the most part, we're pretty laid back. And now, as it's hockey season now, well, the rivalries begin. So
I can tell you for a fact that we several years ago we were setting up this production company, and the production company didn't fly, but we got our work visas and the whole thing, and we had to stand in line up there. And myself, my wife, and one other girl from Sweden, I think, were the only white people in a line, who were all Asian, by the way. Every single one of them was Chinese. And it was a line that stretched out the building and around the block. And every single one of them was Chinese or Korean or Vietnamese. All of them. All of them. And they were all getting work visas in Canada. So,
and that's a big issue right now with down in Vancouver, especially with real estate prices. I mean, there was one home where the government finally looked into it, where this student was living in a $45 million house. Well, how does a student get a mortgage for $45 million? Right, so the Chinese currency that has come into Vancouver, it has absolutely ripped apart the real estate. I mean, the realtors there are making killer money, but it's basically pricing out everybody from the area. And homes are getting hard to find. Like, people who were, say, charging $1,500 a month for rent are now getting $3,000 a month for rent. If you want to put your house up for sale at, say, $500,000, next thing you know, there's a bidding war that sees you selling it for $900,000. That's just the way it's working right now.
Well, it's, you have right now I think Vancouver has one of the largest Chinese populations outside of Beijing. And the whole area, the Chinatown, is certainly fun to go to, but it's a question of being, completely inundated. It's going to be, the whole Chinese question is going to be very, very interesting coming up in the future, because it's, years ago, back in '94, when I had this sort of magnum opus looking at like 100 years in the future, I said then that communism would be replaced, that the Chinese would become more capitalistic, but that would be the danger, is that then suddenly when they get Coca-Cola and want all the stuff we want here, they're going to come here and take it. And by the year 2025, there was a white paper that was written on this called Project for an American 21st Century, and it almost started a war with China. And because some of the projections in it were things like, by the year 2025, we're going to need an entire new planet just to feed the population of China. And the concern is not so much, well, not only is it at the real estate aspect of them coming in and buying real estate. And by the way, please, I have to remind you that Donald Trump is absolutely telling you the truth, that this is our money. This is money that they've extracted from the economy of the United States by our government betraying us and them taking our industry, them taking our means of production. All of this, all these trillions of dollars that you see the Chinese throwing around, all came from us. I mean, if the United States sneezes, the whole world gets a cold. And please remember that Walmarts and all these Walmarts and Kmarts and whatever else are all just distribution centers for Chinese goods for jobs that they took from us. Now, what's happening is they're coming in and buying up all of the they're coming up and buying the farms. And what's going to happen is that when there are food shortages, food is going to be going to China, and the Chinese are going to be eating. I mean, in China, there's a lady friend of mine who just came back from China saying, they say, oh, eat all your food. People in America are starving. What they used to say to us when we were little kids. And now it's no joke. They're buying up the farms. They're buying up the big agriculture to the point of where Americans might find themselves starving in their own country, while all the food, along with the oil and everything else, is all being shipped out to China. The other thing that created a huge conflict as well was that in the white paper was talking about how that the United States would have to actually develop smart bombs, DNA bombs, or genetic weapons that would only kill Chinese. And SARS was one of those genetically specific viruses that was let out of the tank, if you will. The Chinese only managed to stop it by, I think, rounding up there was a town of about 16,000 people that were infected, and the Chinese went in and basically just blew it up. You didn't hear anything about it here in the Western press, but they just nuked this entire city because it was riddled with the SARS virus. And it was really a fluke that we managed to catch as much of SARS as we did, because that was a genetically specific engineered virus that was designed just to attack the genetics of Chinese and various Asian cultures. And, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about culling the population of China using these genetic weapons. And it'll be interesting to see how that works, because at some point, the Chinese might just come here to the United States. And this was one of my predictions back in '94, that we would eventually, at some point about the next decade, within 10 years, that we would actually go to war with China and actually face an invasion through the Pacific Northwest and through Alaska of the Chinese army, which is sort of if you really think of it, I mean, this is kind of a no-brainer, but it's one of those biblical prophecies that talks about the kings of the East, and that the kings of the East would put together an army of 200 million men, and they attack in the Valley of Megiddo. But the question then becomes, and this is a big theological question that's bounced around, as to whether or not you have two sets of prophecies. One is for the land of Canaan and Israel, and that the second set of prophecies seem very clearly to be talking about a place that is not Israel, that is described in the book of Joel as having a great river to the south. It's the shining seas to the east and west, and its northern border would be the top of the world. Well, if that's the second Holy Land that's prepared in the wilderness, then that very, very clearly points almost exactly geologically. Once again, this is in the 1st century, where it's not even. It's back further than that. It's about 3rd century BC that the book of Joel is written. It talks about this new Holy Land, this the shining seas and the great river. And it's a lot of what drove Manifest Destiny, what people don't realize. The Great River is obviously the Rio Grande, which means Great River. The shining seas on either side of the Pacific and the Atlantic. The northern border being the top of the world is a union with Canada. But then that makes the Valley of Armageddon, or what's known as the Plateau of Judgment. And it's very interesting because the word Denver, which is the secondary federal capital. The only thing that's wrong with this program that's all called Designated Survivor is Kiefer Sutherland becomes president of the United States. He's secretary of, I think he's Health and Urban Development, like HUD or something, and they blow up everybody in the Capitol, is that they wouldn't stay in Washington, D.C. They would actually move within 48 hours to Denver, which is the secondary federal capital. And that's why they built that airport out there. That was that $25 billion airport that broke the savings and loan industry, built by the Bushes, I might add. But that airport goes down about 25 levels or so, and then interconnects through high-speed porcelain jet trains that connected to Washington, D.C., Area 51, Edwards Air Force Base, Kirtland Air Force Base, everything around it. And you can bivouac 250,000 troops on that tornado plane, where they built the airport. So it would be interesting that the word Denver, Den, which were the Danites actually, were the judges, and actually it means to judge, and Ver or Var actually means plateau. So it's actually Denver means the plateau of judgment. So I mean, there's a whole group of people who claim, biblical scholarship and all this, much better than I, that talk about that if the last battle occurs, that the kings of the East, being the Chinese, don't invade the Middle East, but in fact invade the United States, which is one of the things that I've seen in my prophecies, my expanse of traveling the time stream using remote viewing techniques for the future, where I've been very prescient and predicting a lot of things that have happened with the U.S., including where we're at now, which is back in '94 predicting the attacks by the Islamic Jihad in 2001 on Washington and New York. In 1998, I said, I ran a picture of Osama bin Laden in my newsletter that said, this is the guy. This guy here is going to be the next great Antichrist, and he's the one that's going to use the aeronautic infrastructure of the United States to actually attack Washington and New York. I don't think that now. I absolutely think that it was an inside job by the Knights of Malta, the Jesuits, and the intelligence community. But to set up that entire IMAX movie that they call 9/11. But since then, my predictions talked about that in 2010 we would see a financial rupture of the United States because of wars in the Middle East, which would then lead us to civil war. And I think we're about there. I think no matter what happens with the election next Tuesday, you have two potential scenarios. If Hillary Clinton wins, you get more of the same. You get a $20 trillion debt that goes completely unaddressed. You have a dissolving of our southern borders with Mexico. You have the legalization of close to 40 million illegal aliens in the United States, which what we call undocumented Democrats, which means that the face of our nation will change forever. The Republican Party will basically just vanish, and you'll have all these people with their hands out. In a wave of immigrants that will destroy our way of life here, and and then you're looking at possibly 4 Supreme Court justices she could appoint with who will tear up the Constitution and just use it as toilet paper. Massive confiscation of guns, complete ignorance and overreaching of the Second Amendment, and at the same time, we get 4 more years of Clinton scandals and crime and people being murdered and quite possibly the impeachment of the first quote female president. So I mean that's what you're looking at. You know what you got with Hillary, and the fact that the Bushes are all voting for her now, and all these left-wing establishment Rockefeller Republicans are all jumping on board the bandwagon, just shows you what mealy-mouthed hypocrites these people are. And at the same time, if Donald Trump takes over, let's say Trump wins by a landslide, and there's a good possibility that he could. People seem to forget that Ronald Reagan was 2 points behind Jimmy Carter in the polls in 1980. And the only reason, and I'm not sure if you've heard me tell the story before, but Walter Cronkite was a good friend of our family. And whenever he was in town, we used to go sailing with him. My dad had a boat, and my dad was the PR director for TRW. It's actually kind of funny because my godfather's name is David Scott. And he drove the lunar rover. He drove the moon buggy with Apollo 14. And my
very cool.
My little brother's the first guy to drive a car on the moon. How cool is that? And my little brother's godfather is Gene Cernan, and he was the last man on the moon with Apollo 17. Although there was an Apollo 18 and a 19 and a 20, but that's what they don't want to talk to you about, because those were missions that were specifically sent up to investigate alien structures on the moon. And then we started using, there's other things that we started using, but if I think if Donald Trump gets in, then I'll say, so Walter Cronkite was a good friend of ours, and Walter Cronkite would brag about the story about how Ronald Reagan was going to choose John Schmitz, who was a congressman for Orange County and a major leader in the John Birch Society back then, and Cronkite and Kissinger went backstage and threatened Ronald Reagan. And they said, if you do not make George Bush your vice presidential candidate, we'll smear you in the press. We will pull a Goldwater on you, and we'll make you look like the biggest warmongering, bloodthirsty son of a gun to come down the pipe. And Reagan was incensed. He was outraged. He hated Bush's guts. He was the antithesis of everything that Reagan was. And he thought, well, I'm 2 points behind in the polls. I could lose this thing, and I need this kind of support. And with that, he made George Bush, and I just wonder how history would have been different. If you think about how history would have been different if he'd chosen John Schmitz instead. And of course, Reagan won by a landslide. He won, I think, 47 out of the 50 states, and just clobbered Carter, and was still stuck with George Bush. And I'm convinced, and you and I both know from being investigative reporters, all the various links between John Hinckley and Jr. and John Hinckley Sr. and George Bush. I'm convinced in my heart of hearts being behind the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan in 81. As a matter of fact, I've done news pieces on this where I show the connections between the Manchurian Candidate mind control aspects of what happened with Mark David Chapman in the dry run of that mind control protocol with Mark David Chapman and the murder or assassination, I should say, of John Lennon, and then using that exact same protocol on John Hinckley for him to then shoot Reagan. And the conspiracy behind Reagan's assassination is also interesting as well, because Hinckley used a 5-shot 38 caliber Cobra detective special, and which he bought actually he bought in Dallas, actually, right at like a gun shop in Dealey Plaza, just to give everybody a hint. And then, there's only 5 shots in that gun, and yet all the ballistics and all the sound recordings of the cameras show us that 9 shots were actually fired at Reagan. Excuse me. And actually, the shot that hit Reagan in the lung was actually fired from a 45-degree angle from up in the trees behind a retaining wall. And we have one of the doctors actually talking about that trajectory actually on tape. But the only thing that saved Reagan's life is he stopped at the very last minute and raised his hand to wave at the crowd. And the first shooter actually, the bullet actually sliced through his arm and lodged in his third rib, as Secret Service agent Sam Spade, actually the guy's name, threw him in the car and jumped on top of him. Even though they tell you the official story is that Hinckley was being wrestled to the ground, fired the gun, and that the bullet bounced off the pavement, went through the back of the bulletproof limousine, went through the seat, and actually hit Reagan when he was inside the car. That's the official story. And when they pulled this supposed bullet out, they claimed it was some kind of explosive pellet. And a guy in a hazmat suit with a pair of tongs and a big lead case came in, and they took this bullet out that had only gone in about 3 inches or so, because it looked like what they said, a fletchet dart. It said it looked like a silver disc about the size of a dime. The exact same projectile that was actually found in Kennedy's throat when Kennedy started choking, and this dart is designed to slow the target down. It's filled with a shellfish toxin that slows down the target when they enter the kill area. And that's what Kennedy was choking on. And this guy, the doctor, put his finger in and said, well, what's this? Pulled it out. Secret Service guy took it, put it in his silver cup. He never saw it again. So, once again, the same groups, the same triangulation of fire, the same mind control op. You had David Chapman wound up to think he's Holden Caulfield from the book Catcher in the Rye, that has to kill the hypocrite to save his little sister. And then you've got John Hinckley wound up to think he's Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver, that he's got to kill the politician to save Jodie Foster. It's the exact same mind control windup. And, and does anybody think it's weird that guy who shoots the President of the United States 3 nights before goes out and actually goes to the home of the vice president and the Bushes and actually has dinner with the Bush family with his dad, John Hinckley Sr., who had actually been Bush's business partner for 30 years and actually ran a company called World Visions International, a charity that actually ran YMCA and YWCA and all these boys clubs and whatever else, which now make Mark David Chapman and John Hinckley both technically employees and relatives of World Visions International, which is used by the CIA to recruit. They use Christian missionaries to recruit in all these Asian countries, Vietnam, and all over the world. So sorry, I'm getting off the track there. Where was I? Oh yeah. So anyway, if Trump gets in, I'm convinced that with I think what's happened is Hillary's been the suspicion is that Hillary's bought something like 137 million illegal weapons that are being actually smuggled into the country now. That with George Soros and the complete approval and applause of the media, you'll see massive riots. You'll see it'll start probably in the South. It'll start in Atlanta. Move up into Baltimore, move into Missouri, move into Los Angeles, Chicago, the major cities, and it'll be basically they'll wave the starting flag for every inner city dweller and resident to basically burn the place down, loot, or what Obama will probably call undocumented shopping, and and basically loot and just burn everything down. And the media just sit back and go, oh, well, you deserve to let off steam, and how dare the American people elect Donald Trump, and you just go burn that stuff down. We'll put together a safe riot space for you, like they did like that idiot mayor did in Baltimore. But and I think that's going to be, however, when Trump, if Trump gets in, we'll see some fantastic changes. But remember, it's I've never seen anybody who's so. I mean, for him to call Hillary Clinton an existential threat to the entire world. I mean, he's given some speeches that just spit in the face of these New World Order guys. He's completely against the military-industrial, entertainment, death society culture.
Let me ask you this. If Trump gets elected, and I still think the system's going to be rigged one way or another, but if Trump gets elected, is he a dead man?
I can't say that. I don't want to say it. I can't say anything like that on the radio. But it's. I don't think so.
I understand. There's, we'll probably be shut down. For saying something like that. But I guess what I'm saying is, because this is probably one of the most violent episodes of Democrat versus Republican elections that we have ever seen involving the public. At least in my lifetime, it has been.
Do you completely forget Detroit in 1968?
I wasn't born.
Hillary. I know, but Detroit in 1968 was much worse than this. It was, there was way more turmoil that was going on with Hubert Humphrey and Nixon, and the fact that you have Lyndon Baines Johnson, saying he's not going to run again. I seem to remember that Hillary Clinton was on the cover of Time magazine throwing a bottle or a rock. I don't think it was a Molotov cocktail, but she was on the front cover of a major magazine, out there with her revolutionary communist pals. People forget that she was, when she was at Wellesley, she was banging Saul Alinsky. She was banging the guy. And this is the guy that wrote Rules for Radicals. This is the book where this guy trained under Al Capone to basically, with his whole plot with Hillary, is that when you're running the scam, you basically make the government the scam. And this is why she's all into healthcare and everything else, because that's how you control people. That was the primary essence of the movie Hillary's America, where that poor Indian reporter went to jail for like 5 years for doing a thing on Barack Obama's America for predicting what America was going to look like in 2016. They sent the guy to jail for 5 years on trumped up charges of he loaned some money to a friend of his who was running as a political candidate, and apparently it exceeded the amount of money you were allowed to give to somebody by like $1,000. And this guy got 5 years probation and 8 months in a prison and all that. But the interesting point about Hillary's America was how she learned. And she was the creepy Lady Macbeth, and she globbed on to Bill because Bill was the popular one. He was the smooth talker. He was the guy that could get her into all the places that she needed to get. And from day one, the two of them were just sexual predators. She wanted to get into the Rose Law Firm, and she said, I have to screw Webster Hubbell, and Webster Hubbell is Chelsea's father. And you look at the two of them side by side before she had old plastic surgery. They're the spitting image of each other. So, people are not getting a piece. The only way they're getting any information about Hillary and about what's going on is through people like me and people like you and, who've been talking about this for a long time. But whether or not they would kill Trump, who knows? I'm sure he would be savvy enough to have enough security around him. I think that I think the first thing he should do is obviously get rid of the Secret Service and actually have, his own private people, because, who runs the Secret Service? The Secret Service work for the Treasury Department, which means they work for the banks, which means that, again, you can't kill the king without the permission of the Palace Guard. They never would have been able to get Kennedy had the Secret Service guys not fallen back, been given orders and agreed to the orders to actually fall back behind the limousine, let him go in an open top limousine. That whole thing was set up and was executed really by the Secret Service, because they were the ones that allowed Kennedy to get shot. Because it's just the way it goes. They what do they do? Two things: they protect political candidates, but why does the Treasury do that? And they go after counterfeiters, which is in essence, anybody that's printing anything other than Federal Reserve notes, which is private fiat money anyway. So whether or not he gets killed, I have no idea. If that's the case, then I think, I think Governor Mike Pence would make a hell of a president. If Hillary does get in and we cruise through this, then you and I both know that even with the Clinton Foundation and even with the blackmail that she's got on everybody in Washington, their power is the fact that they run basically sex clubs and sex palaces and all these people that they put on the Pedo Express to go to Jeffrey Epstein's private island and go have sex with very well-paid teenage girls, I might add, who come down to the island. But they've got video on everybody. I mean, they've got that's the juice that they've got. They can blackmail anybody in government. Not only were they providing the sex parties and the orgies, but they were providing the girls to accompany, generals and politicians and whatever else to step out on their wives who didn't want to go do that stuff. So they've got all this on film and on tape. That's the power they have, the power of blackmail. But she will either be dead within a year because of because she's sick. She's a very, very ill woman. She had she was in a plane crash. They went on a top secret mission to Iran where a Navy SEAL was killed. Their plane crashed, and Hillary received very, very severe head trauma from that incident. And I think she's got Parkinson's. We saw when she fainted at the 9/11 thing. She can't control her bladder. She was wearing adult diapers, and then she was wearing there was a catheter tube that was actually then attached to her calf. That's what happened in the 9/11 thing, is that when she was going towards the van, she was going into seizure, and she had a lady doctor in front of her who was holding up two fingers to have her squeeze her fingers as a seizure test. And when she was losing the strength in her hand, they were shuffling her off to the van to cut the event short. And as she was stepping into the van, she began to seize. And as she stepped up to step into the van, she missed the step and went into the gutter. And when she fell forward, it popped the colostomy bag that she actually had on her calf. And that was the clip that you saw that actually popped out her pant leg. It was the clip that actually clamps it onto her shin. And that's what we saw when they shuffled her in there. They then took her to, I think it was Montpelier Hospital, and then they made up this whole story that she'd had. I mean, it wasn't until 2 days later they made up the pneumonia story. And then she's supposedly at Chelsea's house, and then they marched the worst double I've ever seen out in front of the press. No Secret Service, dancing around on the sidewalk. All the photographers, she's like, "Hey, how you doing? I'm feeling great." Starts slobbering all over this 5-year-old girl, even though she's got pneumonia. But single-handedly the worst double I've ever seen, marched out in front of the press just to show that she's okay. And but if not that, then she'll be impeached. And once again, we'll go through the long national nightmare of investigations and people dying and whatever else. But as it stands now, the FBI, Comey was just wading through basically the mutiny of everybody underneath him that worked on this, that worked on how crooked Hillary was and how crooked and what a massive global money laundering and espionage ring that the Clinton Foundation is. But she'll be impeached and convicted she'll be impeached by the Congress, just like her husband and just like Andrew Johnson was. But neither Clinton or Andrew Johnson were ever convicted by the Senate. But there's a good possibility she's convicted by the Senate. And if that means either she's not dead or she goes to jail. Now, let me throw this out to you. Remember I talked about how the intelligence communities and the Jesuits and the Knights of Malta were all behind 9/11?
Yes.
That means that watch Tim Kaine. That means Tim Kaine has a good possibility of being president of the United States, which means now the Jesuits control not only the presidency of the United States of America, but also control the papacy as well, because Pope Francis is a Jesuit. As a matter of fact, he's named after Francis Xavier, who was one of the first executor generals or superior generals of the Jesuits. It wasn't named after St. Francis. It was named after Francis Xavier, who's a major soldier in the Jesuit cause. And that's another reason why Cardinal Ratzinger, or Pope Benedict as we know him, he had a good talking to by the Jesuits. And the Jesuits and the Knights of Malta came in, and from noon to 4, they sat there and they poked their finger in the chest of the Pope, saying, here's the deal. You are not pressing the war against Islam. You are not pressing the war against the cross and the crescent. You know how dangerous these Muslims are. if we don't do something about them, then what's going to happen is that the Middle East will implode. You'll have massive immigration up into Europe. And I know that we're talking about these things because I wrote a book about this in 2009. I wrote Dark Prophet, Veil of the Antichrist. And in 2009, I predicted everything that's happening right now. The conceit of the book is that you had an Iranian prophet who finds the second book that Muhammad wrote, which is true. It's called The Alienation of the Rose. And he uses it to begin to link Islam together, and all these governments basically fall. And his weapon is mass immigration up into Europe. And, I wrote this whole book about it in 2009 that we hope we're going to turn into a movie here soon. But, but then their conversation with the Pope lasted about 4 hours, which was weird because it was like noon to 4. At 5 p.m., lightning struck the cross on St. Peter's Basilica twice, not once, but twice. And at 6 p.m., Ratzinger became the first pope in 672 years or something to actually resign the papacy and hand it over to literally, I guess what you would call the Black Pope, because the Jesuits dress in black, not white, but to Francis, to Carlo, I forget his real name, but it's to Pope Francis, who names himself after one of the Father Superior Generals of the Jesuit Church. And the Jesuit, once again, as I said, the Jesuits are the CIA of the Catholic Church, and they're the ones that have the power of the confessional. They would go to all the bishops, and the bishops would get reported to by the local monsignors, who would tell them, who's screwing who and who's doing what, and they would know all the secrets because of the confessionals. And, they've molded history quite a bit down through time. The new Dan Brown movie is out there, Inferno, about a plague being released and all that. But, my book, Black Seraph, which is about genetically engineered weapons, and I have a character who's who's half Irish, half Bedouin, and he's a Jesuit priest who acts as a spy for the Jesuits. This character, Abdul the Bandit, Father Dominic Lindquist, which is my first book, Black Seraph. Then I wrote another book called Dark Prophet, Veil of the Antichrist, which was just all about what would happen and what would be the reaction of the church if this Islamic character tried to retake Cordoba, Spain, which was the whole caliphate of that area, which was the last place that the Muslims were actually driven out of Europe by Charles the Hammer Martel, way back in the day. So I wrote a whole big novel about that, which was Dark Prophet. And so it's just interesting how we would now have a Jesuit as Pope and as President of the United States, if that were to occur.
I want to get to a question here, and we only got about 4 minutes before we got to go to break here, Sean. You know how it works on the double R machine. Anyways, I think this is a very interesting question. This is from Elizabeth, and Liz is asking, have you ever looked into what is going on with Julian Assange?
Well, yeah, it's pretty easy. I mean, it's Assange was, they used the same, sex scandal honeypot stuff by claiming that a girl that he worked with suddenly came out of nowhere. She got paid a bunch of money to claim that he raped her. Even though supposedly after this rape, she continued to work for him for, weeks afterwards and kind of hang out with him, and, nobody was the wiser. So that's why that's why he was going to be taken back to where he was. He's hiding out in the Ecuadorian embassy. Is it Ecuador?
Yes.
Yeah, the Ecuadorian embassy in London. So he's been there now for about 3 years. But what's happening is that he really he's got this huge bone to pick with the Clintons, because the Clintons were basically the ones that set him up. They were the ones that paying. This is classic. Paying women to lie about having sex with people or being raped or squeezed or whatever is what they do. So it's no surprise to me whatsoever that suddenly they've now paid, and of course they're all being dragged out crying by Gloria Allred. And I've had run-ins with Gloria Allred. I mean, person to person, face to face. I've known clients that Gloria Allred has had where I know for a fact that Gloria Allred has perjured witnesses, that she's perjured medical documents, that she has. She's a piece of work, is all I can say. And that's my personal opinion about Gloria Allred, because I don't want to get sued. But I know Gloria Allred, in my opinion, for the complete liar and devil that she is. So I wouldn't trust anybody that Gloria Allred pulls out. But here's what's happening with Assange. Assange has so many documents to release, but now what's occurring is that his operatives out in the world are being threatened. I think 2 of which have died. But they're being arrested and they're being threatened as well, which is kind of muzzling him. But the biggest thing that we're learning right now, the biggest thing we're learning is that these leaks and these emails and this massive evidence that is sinking Hillary Clinton is not coming from the Russians at all. It's coming from the American intelligence community. It is coming from the CIA, the DIA, the FBI, all these affected people who are submitting their resignations. A complete mutiny is on his hands by James Comey, who is just dipped in the Clinton blood along with everything else. I mean, he and Loretta Lynch both should be recusing themselves. And you know why there's a revolt between Loretta Lynch and Congress? Because Bill Clinton met on the tarmac on what I call snakes on a plane, where they supposedly talked about golf and their grandchildren. And I'm sure Clinton said, "You want to see my grandchildren? Look, I got a whole case of them right here. Don't they look just like Benjamin Franklin? Don't they look cute? Don't they look cute?" And he's like, "Are those your grandchildren? You ever want to see them again?" And that's what went on. I mean, she got a massive bribe along with a promise that you will be held over in a Hillary administration as the Attorney General. And remember where Loretta Lynch came from. Loretta Lynch came from taking people's stuff. Loretta Lynch came from having as an Attorney General where she was, of confiscating close to $1 billion in private property from people, taking houses, taking farms, taking cars, all kinds of stuff. So, Loretta Lynch is a piece of work as well. And this is why there's this big debate, because the Justice Department this whole time with Loretta Lynch has been covering for the Clinton crime machine. And the FBI, here's the problem. Once the FBI gets into the Clinton Foundation, now it's not just the Clintons you're exposing, it's everybody in Washington. It's everybody. And that's what they're looking at. Does the FBI just completely end the government as we know it over what the Clintons know? Because now the game is that Podesta and Humma Weiner and all these people are looking at 10 years in federal prison, all of them. And they're like, I'm not going to swing for the Clintons.
We're going to step out for a break. More Sean, David Morton on Spaced Out Radio right after this.
Looking for news beyond the mainstream news? Head to spacedoutradio.com and check out the SOR Spacewire. This is Spaced Out Radio's Eric Markham, news director for the SOR Spacewire. Daily, I will bring you intriguing stories and outlandish reports from what's going on around the world. UFO sightings, paranormal activity, conspiracies, alternative health, and so much more. And if you have news, email me at news@spacedoutradio.com.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries, so tune in at spacedoutradio.com.
Have you had an experience you can't explain? Had a run-in with ghosts, maybe Bigfoot, or seen lights in the sky? Hi, I'm Mike Schmidt from the SOR Sightlines. I'm here to investigate your sighting. Head to spacedoutradio.com and fill out a report on the Sightlines. All your information is 100% confidential, and I will help you figure out what you've been seeing. File your report, and let's find out the answers together.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
From British Columbia to Northern California, Pacific North Weird has Cascadia covered. Check out our feature videos at spacedoutradio.com, where I, Vincent Zunza, and my super sleuth partner Alexandra Sullivan track down the weird and strange stories from around the Pacific Northwest, from Bigfoot to Mel's Hole and everything in between. This is what makes life exciting. So why report the normal when we can report the Pacific North Weird right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Oh, there's only one way to rock. Loud and proud. In high definition. Radio 702 rocks. Las Vegas.
Have you ever had an extraterrestrial experience? One you just couldn't explain? Well, maybe I can help. Hello, I am Samantha Mullet. On the second Tuesday of each month, I will join Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio to bring a human aspect to ET contact. It's something I've lived with my entire life, and I'd love to help you understand. Let's share our experiences. The ET Experience, the second Tuesday of each month, only on Spaced Out Radio.
Hi there, this is Jolene with Reveal Reiki and Readings, and I want you to relax. Let me help you chill out and get in touch with your body, mind, and soul. In this busy world, sometimes we need to let go, and this is where I can help. Visit my website, rivuletrndr.wix.com/rivuletrndr.
Every Saturday and Sunday night, as Dave Scott wanders aimlessly in the wilderness, you can come hang out with me, James Tyson, in Spaced Out Weekend. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, I'll take you along as we talk with some of the best experts in their fields. SpacedOutRadio.com is the place to find us. So sit down, relax, put your feet up. Enjoy the topics like the paranormal, supernatural, intuitiveness, and so much more. Hope to see you there.
Hi there, this is your psychic medium, Joanna, and I would love it if you would join us every other Sunday on Spaced Out Weekend. With host James Tyson, we'll bring you personal psychic messages on two mediums and a large. Questions about love, life, career changes. We would love it if you would come and join us live. Call in and listen in for the experience. Allow us to open the doors to your other side. Two mediums and a large, heard only on Spaced Out Weekend at spacedoutradio.com.
Would you like to become one of our space travelers? All you have to do is click on the Space Travelers icon at spacedoutradio.com. For only $5 a month, you can get access to some great prizes, as well as private monthly shows, newsletters, and a members-only section on our website. Become a space traveler today.
Do you have a topic or a guest that you'd like to hear on Spaced Out Radio? Let us know at spacedoutradio.com, where you can sign up to become a Space Traveler member today. Or you can find us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on our Facebook page, Spaced Out Radio Show. Welcome back to Spaced Out Radio. Tonight I am your host, Dave Scott. I know Gloria's loving this song. We do it every first break for her. If you're listening in on the Revolution Radio, it is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Do us a favor, visit freedomslips.com and donate today. Still waiting for a Bill Cardwell password for the night. He must be out feeding the horses or something. But we'll figure it out. He'll be around. We'll get to the password next. Tomorrow night on the show, our Keith Andrews is back for the ET Experience. He comes in the first Friday of every month. That gets going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time, right here on the mighty SOR. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can do so at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, I can be followed at Dave Scott, SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. And our website is spacedoutradio.com. You can tune us in on TuneIn and download this show and others on iTunes. We bring in Sean David Morton once again, as he'll be with us for the full show. We're going first hour. We somehow got on to politics, and we never really talk politics on this show. But
sorry.
That's
but
okay.
But it's strange, right? I mean, this isn't this the strangest election we've ever seen? Isn't this the weirdest stuff? Isn't it? I mean, it's perfect for this kind of late night radio because it's so weird.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I fully agree. And you know what? I can honestly say, Canadians are intently watching this because whatever happens down there, it always affects us up here.
Right.
It really does. I mean, yes, we're two totally different sovereign nations, but we are so intertwined with one another that, Canadians are wondering, geez, do we really want Ratbag Hillary in there, or do we really want the egomaniac in Donald in there? And all the Canadians wanted was Bernie Sanders. That's it. We just wanted the nice guy in there, but typical Canadian. We'll just say, "Oh well." I'm sorry.
The old Jewish grandpa. Here's what I'm saying about what we need to do, and it's like, I'm sorry. People who were for Bernie Sanders are just bad at math.
Well,
bad at math.
Let's change topics here because when I first started this show, I couldn't believe it. Before I had even aired an episode, all of a sudden, I got a friend request from Bob Lazar.
Oh, my goodness.
On Facebook.
What?
And then I added him, and I was all giddy, and I sent him a message, thank you, never got a reply back, and then a month later, he was gone. I guess he got off Facebook.
Yeah.
And so Bob Lazar is such an intriguing character because this is a man who we all want to believe. He's really the only true insider of Area 51 to give pertinent information as to what was happening there before he got busted. And
it's not exactly true, but yeah, okay, but go ahead. Yes.
But in the end, he's the biggest known name and the most popular. Like, people love his story. They absolutely, as much as there was a lot of people criticizing him, there was a lot of people who loved the fact that he had the stones to come out publicly. So you know him. What kind of a gentleman is he?
He's exactly what you described. He's a weird cat. He's just a weird cat, and he's got an interesting. Look, I know all the intricacies of the story because I know all the players. I knew Bill Cooper. I know John Lear. I know George Knapp. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, I thought about writing a book from the inside of all this, but I didn't want to really. Bob never really wanted the publicity that much. Really, I mean, Bob was the one that took the brunt of this entire thing. I mean, he was the only one. They went after him for putting up security cameras in a parking lot at a legal brothel. And because this is the strangest thing, because he lived in an area where prostitution wasn't legal, even though he went to Nye County where prostitution is legal and just set up security cameras in the parking lot to keep the place safe, somehow he was the only person in like Nevada history to be actually convicted of, I guess, pandering, I think is what it was. And his punishment was that he had to do like 40 hours of community service, which he did by actually teaching science at a science fair, I think, at a local high school. So it's, there were movies. They tried to do some movies about Bob. Unfortunately, once again, this is just my opinion. He got hooked up with who I think is just kind of a hucksterish guy named Gene Huff. And Gene just completely mishandled him. I mean, guys like Kevin Costner was interested in his story. I remember reading a script that they had where he was like discovering element 115. It was complete crap. There was actually a really good script that was written by John Lear and friends, because his father was involved in the film business with the Lear Jets. His dearly departed wife, Mary, actually was one of the big casting agents actually in Nevada. She was a big time casting agent in Las Vegas. But to talk about the Lazar story, the weird part about how it starts is, how much you want to know about it? How far back you want to go? I mean, we just let me just put it to you this way.
You know what? We've talked a little bit about Bob Lazar here, but we've never had an insider such as yourself. So you got a free reign here.
Okay, all right. So here's where it all starts, and I think it's short. It happens over a very short period of time. In the weird thing about 5-1 is that 5-1. I mean, guys like I grew up with astronauts because my dad was a PR director. He was vice president of TRW, and TRW was the biggest aerospace company that built the Voyager, the Viking. When I was a kid, I got to go in the bunny suit and watch them build the lunar module over on 33rd and Apollo, which is oddly enough, I stood in the same place where I was on an episode of Ally McBeal, and I'm standing there next to Callista Flockhart going, we built the missiles that actually, that actually took us to the moon in these hangars that are now Raleigh Studios that then became Marvel Studios. Her response to that was, which is Callista Flockhart because she's kind of stupid.
Such a crush on her back in the day on Ally McBeal.
Back in the day, and I won't go into that. So anyway, so I grew up with astronauts. I grew up with, Gus Grissom was like a second father to me. And, I bet kids money in the neighborhood that Gordon Cooper wasn't sleeping on my couch. And then he wanted to cut. He wanted 50% because, there's like 50 kids in my front room watching Gordon Cooper sleep. And he wakes up and he goes, I want some of the money. And so I grew up with all these astronauts. Don Isley was scheduled to be on Apollo 1. And he put me up on his shoulders, and we jumped off the diving board in the pool in my yard, and I landed on him wrong, and he dislocated his shoulder, and that's what saved him from going on Apollo 1. And they took Chaffee instead, and those are the guys that that died on Apollo 1. Anyway, so let's go back all the way back to Area 51. So Area 51 it was originally called the Docktown Strip. It was then called Groom Lake, obviously for a while. And they were testing a lot of U-2 spy plane. They were building the SR-71 Blackbird. The Blackbird was doing between a top secret Mach 4 and Mach 6 by like 64. And then they let the public know about the Blackbird in 74, and then they retired the program in 78. So there's always been spooky stuff there. But the really weird stuff started moving in about 86 or 87. And at that time, the guys at 5-1 wanted to be able to expand their border by 89,000 acres. And the state of Nevada was like, well, no. And finally, the Area 51 guys got tired of asking, and they just did it. Because you used to be able to just walk up over these low hills, and you could stand at literally a chain link fence. It was just a chain between posts, and you could stand there and, if you wanted to. And John Lear had taken some photos of the base way back in like 78 or so. So they expand their borders up over the hills, about 89,000 acres. Harry Reid, of all people, gets all pissed off. And they say, what the hell are you doing? What makes you think you can just take 89,000 acres of the state of Nevada and make it yours? And they said, well, we answer to a higher authority than you, sir. And, of course, Harry Reid said, you want to tell me who's higher than the Congress of the United States? And they said, well, we'd be happy to answer that for you. Why don't we give you a tour? Of course, everything that goes on the tour gets this pine-scented Kool-Aid, if you will, and a little, mind control twist, and they come out of there going, oh yeah, sure, they can do whatever they want. So in 87, 88, and by the way, I chronicle this all in my books, Sands of Time. Sands of Time, my books, Sands of Time 1 and 2, and then the latest one, Sands of Time 3, the Isomer Protocol, are simply, and I don't want to pat myself on the head here, but we have a 5-star rating on Amazon as some of the best books on this subject ever written. I was friends with, ever since the Area 51 experience, friends with a top-level director of these programs who, for whatever reason, just started calling me on the phone, giving me information, which then I would relate on the Art Bell Coast to Coast show back when it was good, and and get it out there. So he saw me as a plausible release valve, if you will, to get information out to the public to prepare them for whatever was to come. In 2009, I got a call from some very spooky lawyers who said, we have something for you for an estate matter. I went up to Century City, and they handed me these journals, which are basically his diaries, throughout the years that took him all the way from Montauk, all the way from the Montauk Project into 5-1, into the Dulce War, into everything that was going on at Dulce, because I was familiar with all these places. And how I got involved in this to begin with was I was a filmmaker, and I'd done a lot of rock music videos back in the 1980s. And in 1989, I started working on a documentary feature with Joe Randazzo as executive producer. So in December of 89, we took a scientific team to the Dulce Archuleta Mesa in northern New Mexico, just a little bit outside of Farmington and just a little bit south of Durango. It's on a Hickory Apache Indian reservation. It sort of all leads to Area 51. So we took up a challenge. There was a guy named Bob Moore who claimed to be a disinformation agent for the CIA. And Bob Moore then said, I made up the Dulce Mesa. I made up everything about it, and I released it into the UFO community just to show people in the community how stupid they are. And we're like, okay, well, I knew a woman, Krista Tilton, who had actually been inside the Dulce Mesa. She'd been abducted. She'd been taken in. Her claim was that she had sex with a Nordic and that her daughter, Monica, she and I were good friends, was actually, a human alien hybrid. I saw Monica do a lot of really interesting, strange things. So, and we took Krista up in a helicopter above Dulce, and she pointed out the entrances. Never having been up there, she said, well, there's this, there's the door, there's over here, fly around here, you'll see where it is. Had a detailed knowledge of the outside of the base after supposedly being abducted, taken inside the facility, and then having contact with a guy by the name of Captain Richard Doty, who she identified several years later when he appeared on television in New Mexico or something. So we went to Dulce in 1989. Myself, Paul Shepard, Joe Randazzo, Dr. Fred Bell, and Dr. James Delatoso. And Dr. Delatoso was working out of the University of San Diego and is one of the pioneers of the Cray supercomputer. So what we did was that he found a way to do large-scale data tabling where, and this is revolutionary back in '89. Remember, we're just messing around with, we didn't have computers or, the kind of stuff that we have today. But what we did was we took a sonic wave that, strangely enough, was actually based on the Pleiadian UFO frequency from the Billy Meyer case, because supposedly this sound can actually explode the Greys. I guess it does something to overload their 3-chakra-based nervous system or something. One way or another, it really pisses them off, whatever this noise is. So we used this sound, and then we sliced tables of this and then recorded it on DAT tape. And the first time we turned this on, we had the camera crew there and the whole deal, and Randazzo sort of gasped. And he's a very, 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 very cool character. And we said, what is it, Jim? And he said, either all my equipment needs to be recalibrated or we're standing on top of New York City. I mean, there's a city underneath us, and we're in the middle of nowhere. I mean, we're, the closest town was 20 miles away at the bottom of the mesa, which was the Best Western, which was the tribal headquarters for the Hickory Apache. So as we're doing this, we're slicing all this up. I mean, it was one of the funniest parts of this is we had to have a guide. So we paid this guy a bunch of money, paid him well, treated him well, but he's an Apache warrior named Fred Electric Warrior was his name, Fred Electric Warrior. And we drove up to the top of the hill, to the top of the mesa, and there was a big gate that said that we couldn't go any further. And we look at our guide, and he says, well, it's our land. We can do anything we want. So we got some pliers out, and we actually popped the bolts on the gate and pushed the gate down. We put it back when we were done, but we pulled the gate up off its hinges, and we went up so that we were right at the top of the mesa. And Fred actually had these giant refrigerator-sized speakers on the truck, and he hooked it into his synthesizer. He had like an old-time, was it Korg synthesizer, I think. And he had actually taken the sound of the Pleiadian beam ships and turned it into an instrument. And so he's up there, and he starts playing toccata in D minor, like da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, wah, 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 and it's reverberating down the valley. And the sky lights up with lights going all different ways. I mean, I couldn't figure it out if suddenly we're in the middle of an instant meteor shower. And, of course, Fred's looking up laughing maniacally going, boy, we're really pissing them off now, boys. It's 2 degrees on like December 19th of 1989. And the bottom line of all of this is that we absolutely proved, using 75 hours of Cray supercomputer time, that there is a base under Dulce, that the base had jet tubes that were coming and going from the base, and the whole thing was being powered by a nuclear pile at the center, which is why they built this big lake on the other side. Now I got to tell that story to tell this story. So with working on the crew then, Joe then says, you want to come with us and actually work on a, kind of a bigger documentary. So at that time, I think it was late January of 90, the next month, we went out to Las Vegas and we interviewed Bob Lazar. We were probably one of the first people to, legitimately get an extended interview with Bob. And so here's what he had to say, which was interesting. He had worked at 51 in December. It was mostly from December, January, February of 88 into 89. And he only worked at the base about 16 days. And he had the pay stubs. He had the Office of Naval Intelligence pay stubs of him being there. And I don't care what people like Stanton Friedman say. It's just, the people that bag on Bob, he never really looked for the publicity. He never looked for the money. He doesn't associate really with the community. We invited him on a cruise, actually. And he was saying, oh, great, that's all I need to be trapped on a boat with a bunch of UFO crazies and all this. So his story sort of begins and ends with John Lear. John Lear was the one that was talking about Area 51 and talking about things that they had there, and that they had actually moved the saucers in and built the Papoose Lake facility somewhere, once again, at the time that they expanded the borders of the base, sometime around 86, maybe 87 or so. Now, this is all chronicled in my book. In my book, Sands of Time, The Adventures of Dr. Theodore Humphrey Jr., it's explained why they bring the ships in. It's explained why there's one with a hole in it. It's explained what it was they were studying as far as the ships, which had to do with not so much the power supply, but it had to do with the fact that when you got in the ships had the ability to dilate time, to actually cruise the time stream, if you will. So if you weren't careful, you could climb into the ship. You'd spend a minute or two in the ship thinking, oh, this is cool. Get out, and 22 or 24 hours would have passed around you without you knowing it, because the ships themselves could actually warp and compress time. What people thought were test flights that they thought lasted 20 minutes and that they'd just flown over Vegas had lasted 4 hours, and they found out that they were, zipping all over Southern California, not realizing it. So here comes Bob Lazar. What happens is that Lazar has a meeting where he's literally just sitting out by a fountain when he worked at Los Alamos, and he sits down next to Dr. Edward Teller, the inventor of the hydrogen bomb and probably the father of chemtrails as well. But he sits next to Teller, and he's just kind of shooting the breeze with him because Teller was actually giving a lecture that night. And, and for whatever reason, Teller gives Bob his card saying, well, if you're looking for a job or, whatever, give me a call. So suddenly, apparently at Area 51, there was an unscheduled explosion. And this is the theory. The theory is that they tried to crack open the engine of one of the saucers, which killed 5 scientists. So since there were more security personnel than there were scientists at the facility, somehow, some way, John Lear starts talking about 5-1 and maybe the inside scuttle that there were scientists killed or there was a weird unscheduled explosion. And Bob was kind of between gigs, and he calls Dr. Edward Teller and says, hi, this is Bob Lazar. We met at Los Alamos, et cetera, and I'm looking for a job. And he just off the top of his head, kind of as a joke, he jokingly says to Teller, he says, yeah, you know anything about this weird place called Area 51? And, maybe they have positions there. And Teller was like, I'll be in touch, and hangs up the phone on him. So Lazar then gets a call from EE&G. And he goes to E&G, and he has this weird – and remember, he's telling John Lear, kind of all about this adventure as it's going on, because Lear was the one that told him about 5-1 and that they had weird stuff up there. So he goes for this interview at E&G, and it's like this giant airplane hangar that they clear out. They're sitting in a table with like 8 scientists at the table with Bob with a chair in front of him. And they grill him for a couple of hours about, well, what do you think about Einstein's theory? Do you think it's real? What do you think about time compression? What do you think about quantum foam? Just asking him all these really weird, edge of time, space, reality questions. So he gets a call to go actually work at the base. And at E&G, they have a whole airport at the corner where they fly these jets that have blacked out windows and big red stripes on them that they used to call the Glanet jets, because it was named Groom Lake Airfield, Nevada Experimental Test Site, which they then changed to Janet because when Kelly Johnson died, Kelly Johnson was the head of the Skunk Works at Northrop, and they were doing all the stuff on the Flapjack bombers and the F-117As and Bs and YF-27s and all that stuff. And when Johnson died, they renamed it. Area 51 is now called Janet, which is the Johnson Airfield Nevada Experimental Test Field, and it's also why they call it Janet Flights, because that's what it stands for. So, he takes the plane, he goes in, and so he spends about 16 days or so working at the facility. Now, most of that story is known to people. Bob told us a couple of interesting stories where this is probably the most interesting story that was actually told to us by John Lear later on. But Lazar was having these meetings with Lear, because he was teaching Lear's wife at that time. Or no, I'm sorry. Lear was teaching Bob's wife, Trudy, how to fly. And so he would sign the flight log or do whatever, and Bob would go over to John's house, and Bob says, "I saw my first alien today." And John was like, "What?" And so they'd spend this time talking under the excuse of, flight commands and, him teaching his wife to fly. So he tells a story about how he was in the hangar, and he and this other guy, this scientist named Phil, they weren't supposed to really use each other's names, but they were actually doing a check over on one of the craft. And there was a real jackass named Dennis Mariana, Captain Dennis Mariana. He was the villain of this entire piece. He was like this brutal, screaming, red-haired maniac. And Mariana was always yelling at people. He was always threatening people. He was always in everybody's faces, like poking them. And so the way the hangar at Papoose was set up, because they would go to Papoose Lake, which was S4, they built these 9 dune-colored hangars into the side of the mountain, and they went down 5 levels, because level 1 was the main hangar. The floors would then drop down, and then the ships themselves would then go into these bays, and they were lit like a car painting place. They were lit 360, and then these planks would come out of the walls, so you could sort of monkey bar around the ships themselves to get all the different angles. So, and then under that, I think, was the security personnel. Under that was where, I'm sorry, all the scientists were on level 3, and then level 4 was security, and then level 5 was the spooky stuff, because they actually had sort of a museum, if you will, of alien bodies that were all stood up in these tanks with blue liquid, with these silver bands across the chest and the groin area. And the very far end of that was called the ambassadorial suites, where they had, for a period of time, live extraterrestrials that they'd actually retrieved from what they call Project Pounce. And Pounce was a thing where the United States would go in and basically retrieve any crash. And that's also, by the way, where the alien interview tape came from, was from the ambassadorial suites at level 5 of a creature that they had that did not live long. A lot of these creatures actually get these. There's biological material that actually builds up in their lungs. They have a single lung heart mechanism. Now, we don't have 2 lungs like us, but it's a single lung heart thing, and that's where and by the way, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of the alien interview, and I was involved in that originally, and I still to this day stand by the alien interview. It's never been debunked. It's never been disproved. The more we look at the tape, the more we learn. Nobody has ever come forward and said, ha, 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 I'm the one that tricked this up.
Is that the one in the dark room?
Yes. Yeah. But if you light blast it, there's all kinds of stuff in that video that's valid. It's I had an emergency room doctor look at it and said, this is absolutely real, because you can't fake the heart monitor behind the creature. And if you look at the heart monitor is not only the type of heart that you're talking about, but is perfectly synced with the breathing and the mechanism. So if you were a puppeteer, you would have to not only be working the puppet, but be working the puppet in such a way that it would show up on that monitor. And he said this is absolutely real. And as we light blasted the tape, which we should have done before, you can see far more details. You can see epaulets on the captain, the guy who's running the experiment, and the whole thing. So I to this day, Victor, who we had on Coast to Coast, by the way, we did sort of a tag team sort of thing with myself and Art Bell and Victor, because we actually got him to go on Coast to Coast to promote the alien interview. But that absolutely, to this day, I'm absolutely convinced that nobody's debunked it. Nobody's come forward. Nobody said, I did this. Unlike, and I was at the beginning of the alien autopsy as well with Bob Keviat. And, I backed out of that one saying, look, Bob, you're selling something that's possibly fake here. And Bob made money selling it as real, and then made money selling it as fake. So he whole B.T. Barnum thing where it's like, look, it's real. No, I've debunked it. And he gets paid either way. So, that whole thing kind of, the whole alien autopsy thing really stank. And I was the one that brought Bob Keviat into it when we were working on Unsolved Mysteries. And, that's the whole thing. So let's go back to Area 51. So here's Bob. So Bob, he's talking about, he saw an alien for the first time. This Dennis Mariana guy was moving back and forth between offices at the end of the hangar. And there's 2 guards. And the guards come out of the office door, and there's a creature in a black skin suit that's moving like it's underwater. It's like Lazar described it as like a puppet underwater, and it was just moving in this complete unnatural form. And everybody in the hangar just stopped. He said he was so terrified, every hair on his body stood up. And he said, you just don't have a frame of reference for what this is. It's just your mind just, I mean, it's not a cat, it's not a dog, it's not a lizard. You just kind of go, and everybody froze. Now, Mariana's yelling at somebody in the other office, and he comes out, and he looks at everybody and goes, what are you effing looking at? What are you effing looking at? Eyes down right now. What are you? And Lazar looked down and started looking away, but he said his friend Phil just vapor locked. The guy was just like, and Mariana at a running jump ran at the guy and kicked him in the stomach and started punching him and threw him down on the ground and just started boot stomping this guy. And, get your eyes down, who you're effing with, going on and on and on and on. So the two guards run over while this alien is kind of just, floating there. And they take Phil away, and he never sees Phil again. So then it gets weird, because then Lazar himself decides to take John out for a little view of the saucers. And, this is what Lazar told us in the interview. He said, look, you don't have to believe a thing I say. You go out on Highway 375 and you go by the 18-mile marker by Steve Medlin's mailbox. It was a big black mailbox at that time. And you go by the road, and you go out on Wednesday nights, which is when they test this stuff, which is interesting because my dad was a test pilot. And he was saying, Monday you get into the base and you're kind of hungover. Tuesday is nuts and bolts day, where everybody fixes everything, and you talk to the engineers and they tighten everything up. Wednesday is when when you actually fly or test whatever it is. Thursday is a debrief on, you meet with the engineers again on what you did. And Friday is either a party that you made it through the week, or it's a funeral for whoever died in the plane. So, and Wednesdays you're supposedly at your best anyway. So they test these things on Wednesday. And Lazar said, you don't have to believe a word I say. Go out on Wednesday night, and you'll see these things fly around for yourself. So he takes Lear out on Wednesday night, and they're out, tooling around in the Tickaboo Valley, and they're watching the flying saucers fly around. He's got videotape of it, and they get chased by the Wackenhut guys. Now the security thing is kind of weird too, because back in the day when it was just military stuff, it was being guarded by something called DISCO, which is the Defense Intelligence Security and Command Organization. But these guys were only serving for 4 years, and then they went to private security, and they pulled in Wackenhut, and the Wackenhut, also known as the Camo Dudes. So they start chasing John and Bob. Now Bob grabs a .45 out of the glove box, and he says, I'll see you later. Meet me up by the stop sign. And at a full clip, he dives out of the truck, and Lear tries to lead these guys away, and the Camo Dudes stop him. And they're like, they knew who John was, and they said, you just tell your little buddy Bob, we know where he is, we know he's out there, and, he better not come back here and do this again. So Lear then picks him up. Well, then Lazar is then called back to the base, and this is when things get bad. Dennis Mariana basically just takes him out in the desert, and they make you what they call a target of opportunity, which means they just turn you loose and shoot at you till you're dead. Now he takes Lazar for a little ride out in the desert, and gets him on his knees and pulls a .45 and puts it in his mouth and pistol whips him with the gun and says, here's the deal. We'll kill everyone and make you watch. We'll kill your parents. We'll kill your wife. We'll kill whatever. You have no idea who you're effing with. And beat Bob up pretty bad. And that was when Bob just kind of snapped. Now, at Lear's house, when he's telling about the alien, it was stranger because he goes back to his house. Now, where Bob used to live was at the end of Jim Lovell Drive, and there was nobody there. He's like the only house in this cul-de-sac, in this big wide open spaces in the desert. He gets into his house. No sooner did the screen door close, but 2 agents from the base are banging on his door. And they say, you spent 3 hours and 22 minutes talking to John Lear. What was it you're talking about? And he goes, we're talking about my wife's flying lessons. And they barged into his house. And he goes, you guys can't come in here. You can't pick my friends. You can't tell me who I can talk to and not talk to. And one of the agents put his hand up on Bob's shoulder and said the word artichoke. And Bob just went out. And all he remembers is that he wakes up a couple hours later and these guys were gone. And he also had a couple of experiences, not only inside the base where they tranked him, and he drank the Kool-Aid, and he said he felt like he was falling down a hole, like his fingers were at the edge of a hole, and that and his arms were stretching down into this hole, and like these alien faces were looking out, and he kept talking about how the kids are all right. The kids are all right, or they're in the other room and they're reaching into my mind. So there was a whole group of weird things that happened, including him being sat in a room, having two of the guards actually cock machine guns and point them at his head while he was going through the dossier of, the Zeta Reticulans and, the Dulce base and the war with all this and all the information he was giving out. But after he got beat up by Mariana, he drives over to, and this is where he's undoing, really. He drives over to John Lear's house. Well, Bill Cooper is there, and it just so happens that they're also talking to George Knapp. Well, Lazar is just, he's just livid. He's beaten up. He's got cuts on his face from, Mariana basically working him over. And Cooper is the one that came out and said, come on, man, come on, tell your story. We got this guy here and, he'll talk to you. And, and then Knapp comes out and says, look, I'll cover it up and we'll do a blacked out interview and the whole thing. And Lazar snaps and says, okay, I'll do it. So they shoot him, in black, but they don't do anything to his voice. And of course, Bob's got this, scientist kind of voice, hi, and he talks about his, the alien ships and everything else. Well, the next day he's going to get this is the end of his whole involvement with it, but he's going to get his, I think he's going to get his driver's license in downtown Vegas. And he gets a call, and it's Mariana. And he goes, hey, I saw your little TV show last night, Bob. You have any idea what I'm going to do to you now? Click. And Bob's now terrified. And he's like, great. So he knows who I am, and he saw me on the TV. The next call he gets is from the base. And the base is saying, we want you to come in for experiments or whatever else. And he knows that once he gets onto the base, it might as well be the dark side of the moon, because you actually signed a thing that says, you don't have no constitutional rights. You're not part of the United States. We can just take you out in the desert and shoot you if we feel like it. So he freaks out. He doesn't go to the base. He goes to get his driver's license, only to find that he's been wiped from the database. And they're like, well, we don't understand this. We can't find you. And when the lady makes a funny face and goes and starts talking to the cops, he runs. And he actually goes to Knapp's house and says, what am I going to do, man? I'm a dead man. And Knapp said, the only way out is through. And we're going to put you on TV, and we got to put your full face so people, so if you get killed, it'll prove that your story is true. So that was the genesis of the whole thing of him at 5'1". There's a lot of other stuff out there. My genesis of this is that then I work on this documentary series for about the next 6 months or so, and we go everywhere. We put together about 600 hours of videotape with scientists, abductees, contactees, researchers. Somebody had a dog barked at a UFO. We went up and down Italy. We went to Billy Meyer's farm in Switzerland, where I became pretty good friends with Billy and his son Methuselah. Went to France. Went to Spain, where we interviewed Dr. Anthony Ribera, who was the partner of Jacques Cousteau for however 30 years, and he was in contact with a race of extraterrestrials called the UMO, along with another group of doctors as well. As a matter of fact, Alex Gautier, who's the guy that discovered AIDS, was actually an UMO contactee. And the UMO were giving us all this medical information, and there was all these books that Wendell Stevens wrote about it, and they had recordings from the UMO, and that's very interesting. And then we were in England, where we're actually in May of 90, I think, where we're actually in the fields watching the lights and the amber gamblers and all this stuff make these giant crop circles. I mean, we were there. We were actually there when it all started, before they turned into the glyphs and all the complicated designs and all that. So, then when Bob came out, he made the Area 51, what we call the science lecture. And that was like, I think that was 91. I think it was 90. And then my epiphany of this is that I hadn't even been out to the base. So on February 26th of 91, I took a friend of mine, and Gary, the people had been going out there for a couple of months before I got there. They've been going out there since November, and I got there in February. But it was Nora Hayakawa, it was Gary Schultz, it was Edward G. Griffin. Actually, I got him to go, or G. Edward Griffin, I got him to go out. Anthony Hilder was out there all the time. And so I finally went out with a friend of mine, Shannon Sands, who was a reporter for the Los Angeles Times. And so we went out to the base. Actually, she met me out there with a photographer from Vegas, and I was with another buddy of mine, Jeff. And we just had the classic thing where it's a dark and stormy night, and there's big gouts of clouds all around all around everywhere. And so we're heading up the road towards the base. Well, Doug Lamoureux, the sheriff, who we would get to know over the years, comes out of the fog with his Mars and Venus lights and says, "Turn around! They're having a test." And I'm like, where? At the base. I'm like, what base? You mean the one that's not on the map? And I actually held the thing up. He goes, all right, wise guy, turn your car around. So Shannon and this photographer, they turn their car around and they haul off back down the road to meet all the other people. Jeff and I are still sort of cruising back around in the fog. And the fog lifts. And suddenly it's very weird because the light goes on at the top of his Toyota. And he's like, whoa, that's weird. Why is that weird? I said, well, because that doesn't work. That light doesn't work. And then he had this little egg-shaped compass on his dashboard, and the thing starts spinning. And then the radio goes on. It was rather close encounters. The radio goes on, and it was actually Art Bell on the radio. And I scream, look out. And he slams the car to the right, and this disc that took up about 2 lanes of the road came in on its edge and actually just kind of floated like a top on its edge and then flattened out. And we're just sitting there going, and then the thing just went, and then it shot off into the desert. But we were 50 feet from this thing. So I get this snow hat that has these funny Viking horns on it and grab the flashlight. And I'm like, I'm going to go, man. I'm going to chase after this thing. And I'm running ahead of him. And Jeff is like, stop. They'll think you're a cow. They'll core out your anus. And, so we're running through the desert after this. And then the ship starts coming at us. And then we're running back the other way, running from the ship. And suddenly it makes this Tibetan bell sound where it goes, and this huge glow comes out of the ship. And then it just goes, when it goes back into the craft, and then it goes, pew, and then it shoots off into the desert again. But this thing couldn't have been more than 20 feet off the ground. So we run back to the car, jump in, go all the way back down to the road, and everybody's looking south towards the lights of Vegas. And I'm like, no, you idiots, the base is up there at the other end, and turn around. And everybody turns around, and this whole group, about 20 people, is watching this little light just bouncing around. So I turn to Shannon, my reporter friend, and she goes, what are you looking at? I'm like, what do you mean? You can't see this? And everybody's going, ooh, ah. And she goes, well, I'm night blind in one eye and I'm legally blind in the other. And I'm like, you're a reporter for the LA Times? And then I said to the photographer, take a picture. And he goes, well, I can't because I have a Hasselblad portrait camera that only has a range of 12 feet. And it's raining, which means the camera's going to get wet. So I'm going to go back to Vegas. I'm like, what's the deal with you? And he says, well, look, I was told to take pictures of people looking at UFOs, not to take pictures of UFOs. And I would hear that mantra, by the way, several times, because then with all our adventures out at 5-1, and then everybody wanted to go, and I started renting a van, and people would pitch in $100 for gas and food, and so I started leading kind of tours out there, where I then found on May 30th of 91, I found this hilltop that actually looked down on the base, and I was like, holy crap, I can see their house from here. And while I'm up there, my girlfriend's asleep in the tent, and the camo dudes are now going through our car where they stole my wallet. And the freaky part about this is I'm like, hey, and of course I'm 2 hours away on top of a hill. But we got woken up in the morning by a helicopter right over the tent. And I thought they were going to kill us, but it turned out to be a long lens camera. They were taking a bunch of pictures of us. And they were just mad. They were mad that we were there because something weird was about to happen. And they took my wallet. So it had my driver's license in it, and I had to go back down. I was living in Nevada at the time, and I had to go back down to Vegas to get my driver's license. But as we went back down into Vegas, there was a huge sandstorm that was epicentered at Area 51. We actually checked the satellite photos in the LA Times the next day. And we actually got trapped in the DMV because all the power went out in Las Vegas. We were literally listening to the radio where they were saying, explosions are happening at the top secret Area 51 base and adjacent to Nellis. And then all the radios went out. So we're trapped in the DMV with all the dust storms and whatever else, with lightning actually bouncing off the Luxor because it was under construction. And then about 3 months later, I came into my house, and my wallet was sitting on my desk. I mean, in a locked room, my wallet was sitting on my desk. So, and then came Sightings and the first episode of Sightings, and I produced on that, where we had, Linda Moulton Howe actually created the show. But once again, the ship came up and started testing and doing whatever, and I had a whole crew just basically cross their arms and point their cameras away and say, we were told not to take pictures of anything up here. And we begged the media to come there. We begged them. And then we'd heard in 92, I think it was, they'd moved most of, all the saucer stuff. And where we're getting our intel from, the girls that we knew, is that strangely enough, a girl I went to high school with was a legal prostitute in the Bunnytail Ranch or something. And she called me on the phone saying, I saw you on the TV. And they were the ones that were giving us all the intel, because these pilots or whatever would come into the brothel and tell these girls all about what was going on. So we knew everything that was going on at the base, and that they were moving everything to Utah, to a place called Area 6413. And apparently now the new head of the the new part of the U.S. Space Command. The new U.S. Space Command top secret underground facility is underneath Kings Peak in the Uinta National Forest in Utah. And now they've actually got advertisements for Space Command to join, saying it's just like a ship. So anyway, so that was all the inside of the Lazar thing. There's more stuff, but Lazar. Then again, there were some abortive movie attempts, and he did his science lecture, which is still I think is every bit as good as anything that Copernicus or Galileo or Isaac Newton ever did, because it describes a whole new world of how the ships are powered. And my point of Area 51, and the reason I took Geraldo out there and worked with him and Keviat and everybody else to expose the place, because it actually, Shannon's story made the front page of the LA Times. So even though it was Knapp and John Lear and Bill Cooper and those guys, who broke the story locally in Las Vegas, it hadn't broken out of Channel 8 in Vegas. So you had a few 100,000 people that knew about it. But once it got on the front page of the Times with Shannon's article, that's when the whole thing just went ballistic. And I took all the Conan O'Brien and all the writers of The Simpsons out there. I took Dean Devlin up to the top of the hill where we had this whole conversation about, so if aliens were to invade the Earth, then Area 51 would really be our last line of defense. And I said, yeah, and that's where the movie Independence Day came from, which in 96, 97 was like the number one movie. And at the same time, then I started working on shows like Strange Universe for UPN, where I was one of the creators on that program. And, just trying to get the stuff out there and trying to, and then when I was working with Hard Copy, I was trying to get these stories out there, but you got to do it with a little humor and a little grace and a little pizzazz. So there you go. So there's the origins of Area 51 and how it got famous.
How has Bob Lazar stayed alive?
If they kill him, I think they prove his point. I think, and I also think that Lazar, and once again, this is in my books, Sands of Time, which by the way you get at StrangeUniverseRadio.com. There's Sands of Time, Volume 1, 2, and 3. Lazar stayed alive because I'm convinced, and this came to me in the notes for my book, that I think he was part of a public relations program. The biggest thing about the mystery of Area 51 was the guys at 5-1, as they call it, were asking the people at Nellis to turn their radar off on Wednesday nights. And the Nellis guys are going, screw you, we're not going to do any such thing. So you have a testing area that is the size of Switzerland inside this protected area, which no one can get into. And yet they're flying these things right over our heads, over a public highway, over the Tikaboo Valley, where they knew we were there. So, and whatever they were doing, they were flying so low into the deck that the guys at Nellis wouldn't know. So it's obvious whatever's happening there is not part of the regular military, number one. Number two, they knew we were out there. We knew we had reporters and the whole thing, and they were still flying stuff right over our heads every Wednesday night. And, we took masses of people. I took busloads of people out there, and it got old hat to me. I'm like, yeah, there it is. It's all that. Other people are like, we're just vapor locking it, seeing a flying saucer for the first time, but, dream come true for a lot of these people. So it had kind of a big effect. And actually it was a direct effect. Jeff Broadstreet used to go out there with me all the time. And so when the mysterious Victor with his piece of alien interview footage called Rocket Video, Tom Coleman said, hey, Jeff, don't you know that crazy Sean Morton guy? Didn't you guys go out there Area 51 a bunch? And he's like, yeah. And he goes, take the call of this guy. So one thing leads to another, if you just have the courage of your convictions, really, and the courage to, face it down. And as my grandmother used to say, never turn down an adventure, which has become the motto of my life. I think there was a very specific campaign, because if you look at it, it's like, okay, we have their ships, they're under control, we're researching them, we have aliens captured. It's all a story of government control. It's not a story of, oh gee, extraterrestrials could roll over in their sleep tomorrow and wipe us out. It's all a very controlled story that I think over the course of the last 20 years or so has been a slow bleed of energy and information, which once again, my books, the Sands of Time books, which have been called, the greatest disclosure documents ever released. Once again, StrangeUniverseRadio.com. It is all part of the publicity campaign, I think, to release a very controlled set of facts and information to the public.
So Bob moves to Michigan. Apparently he has a car design that he wants to help develop. Has he been able to get his life back on track, or is he still struggling to get back into civilian life, so to speak?
I don't know. I haven't contacted him other than to invite him on a cruise. I know he's building jet cars in Michigan. Of course, he moved back there because of the car industry and all that. Because remember, his whole thing was building jet cars. That's what he was famous for in Los Alamos. Matter of fact, he was on the paper. That's what's interesting. He was on the front page of the paper. Los Alamos man builds jet car, and on the back of the paper was the lecture of Edward Teller. Now, again, George Knapp went to Los Alamos, asked them about Bob. They said, we don't know anything about him, and yet he went to the directories in the libraries and found Bob's name in the directories of the library as having worked there, along with him having check stubs from the Office of Naval Intelligence, for the some 16 days, which were spread out over about 3 months that he actually worked at the base. And the reason he got the job at the base, even though he didn't pass a lot of security clearances, is once again, they were more concerned about people they could probably blackmail to stay quiet and, had weird, unusual backgrounds. And that they had just lost like 5 scientists to some kind of explosion that he got the job, which was kind of a fluke. Although, again, why fly stuff over our heads when you could actually fly it over they own the entire middle part of the state of Nevada. I mean, the federal government owns 89% of the state of Nevada. And I can tell you that the vast majority of where 5-1 are gigantic underground bases and facilities that stretch for miles. So I don't know, as far as Bob goes, they just left him alone because I think he was part of a controlled release of information.
So let's go back before Bob came out. Do you think, or do you believe in the whole Eisenhower humans for extraterrestrial technology conspiracy theory that's out there?
Yeah, but it wasn't that wasn't Eisenhower at the time. Look, some weird things, and these are some revelations also that are coming out in my Sands of Time book. When the tall whites, as they were called, they called them the Etherians, actually, simply because they had these devices on their belts where they could flip them and they could become invisible. The deeper story here, the cover story that you've been told, is that the tall whites, they show up, they say, oh, take me to your leader, that it was all very benign and very benevolent, and it wasn't any such thing. Using German technology, and this was the whole thing about, there's a whole book that was written on this called NASA, Nazis, and JFK, where JFK was looking and had access to some of the super secret, let's say non-chemical rocket-driven stuff. Von Braun was one of the dumb guys. I mean, when they divided up the rocket scientists at Peenemünde, where half of them went to Russia and the other half went to the United States, these are the V2 rocket guys. These were not the guys like Hans Kammler. These are not the guys that were dealing with the Nazi Bell and were dealing with the Haunebu and the Vril craft and the stuff that was actually the flying saucer technology. Oddly enough, there was a scientist named Victor von Schauberger who actually invented the implosion drive and actually created a ship that could go 4,000 or 5,000 miles an hour, basically off an implosion drive. And he actually came to America, and they tried to develop some of his engines and techniques, but nobody in Texas understood him, and he just languished here for a couple of years. And he went back to Austria and died. But Schauberger was responsible for he single-handedly probably designed every aircraft we're flying today. I mean, the S-747, the SSD supersonic transport, the DC-10. I mean, he came up with all these things because he was a game warden who studied the design of fish and how fish move through water, and he then replicated that for airplanes moving through air. But and there's a whole other story. I mean, the key to all this, David, is that if you look at the history of the 20th century and you factor in these flying saucers and these Vril craft and these Haunebu and the designs that you see, how the hell do the Nazis, or the Germans, should I say, go from 1917, 1918 to having Sopwith Camels, biplanes that were put together with canvas and wire, to then in less than 20 years actually achieving spaceflight, actually achieving the possibility of having flying saucers that could do amazing things, that could actually get outside the atmosphere and do God knows what. I mean, that's the biggest mystery of the 20th century. And there's a whole story there that we're working on, a 16-part TV series that we're going to call Vril, that is actually all about that top secret aspect and how Hans Kammler was the one that actually found the Nazi Bell. He found the heart of a crashed alien spaceship in the Black Forest, I think, in 1936. And that's how Kammler If anybody studies Hans Kammler was the Obergruppenführer. He was the second most powerful man. Hitler was powerful inside Berlin, but Kammler ran the entire rest of Europe. He had 14 million people enslaved under him at one point. So, and he was also the one that came up with the whole concentration camp system. Sorry, excuse me. But he's the one that actually found the heart of a crashed UFO, which became known as the Nazi Bell, and what they were doing with the Nazi Bell. But let me see. I'm not sure if this is too far afield to talk about that. Let's just say, okay, so 1953. I can tell you for a fact that the National Security Agency, that the NSA, using at that time German technology, landed on the moon in January of 1953. And when we landed on the moon, that is when suddenly we became noticed by these races of ETs who very firmly believe that human beings are a virus, that we're basically a disease, and that even our language is considered a mind-eating cancer by by some races in the solar system. It's not the big happy family that people think of. The reality of this is that the tall whites showed up at Muroc, which is now Edwards Air Force Base, and basically said, "You're going to bring your leader here right now. We're going to have a discussion with Eisenhower," where they were saying, "What the hell? We're not going to allow you to do this. We're only going to allow you limited travel. You've landed on the moon. We think you're a disease. You're a virus. Whatever else." The whole thing is that they possibly said that maybe if you give up nuclear weapons, and they explained to them that these nuclear weapons were actually ripping holes in the fabric of the space-time continuum. Number one, that's the first thing they were doing, was ripping holes in the fabric of the space-time continuum. Number two, by dropping all these nuclear weapons on the planet, we untethered the magnetic connection to the core of the Earth, and therefore magnetic north, which had been perfectly fat and happy when we discovered it in 1832, now started moving north. And that if magnetic north were to meet with true north, that the planet would flip, that you would either have an electromagnetic shifting of the poles, the planet would loll over on its side, nothing may happen as well, but you actually were looking at quite possibly a planetary flip at that time. And they predicted it, saying that as it moves towards magnetic north, that you're looking at this between possibly 2012 and the end of the decade, between 2012 and 2020, you could possibly have a shifting of the poles. Oddly enough, on December 9th of 2009, Barack Obama and a gang of his people go to Norway for Obama to actually accept the Nobel Peace Prize. And even Obama was like, I get it. I'm black. I'm cool, but I don't really deserve this thing." And some very weird things happen.
Sean, we're going to get you to hold on, continue this story right after the break. Sean David Morton, our guest on Spaced Out Radio tonight. 1 hour to go.
The SOR Sightlines is a place for you to find answers to your strange experiences. Hi there, this is Mike Schmidt. If you have had an encounter with ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, ETs, or anything else that doesn't make sense, head to spacedoutradio.com and file a Sightlines report. All information you give is 100% confidential, and I will personally help you find the answers you need. SOR Sightlines, your answers are a click away.
Greetings and salutations, space travelers, from the Chronicles of the Unknown team.
What is Chronicles of the Unknown? I keep hearing about this thing.
It's a new paranormal reality TV show based right here in beautiful British Columbia, Canada. Follow our team as we uncover claims of activity on the Caribou Gold Rush Trail. You can also follow us here every third Monday, where 2 members of our team will be available to answer your questions. We'll give you some equipment updates and some of our experiences on the road, right here on Spaced Out Radio.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with the UFO-COP. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
This is your medium, Joanna, from Spaced Out Weekend, 2 mediums and a large. I would love it if you would come and join us with host James Tyson every other Sunday on Spaced Out Weekend. Together, we will take your calls and your questions live. Our goal is to provide you with a positive outlook on deep questions that you may have. Questions regarding love, relationships, money, or whatever else is on your mind. Come and check us out at spacedoutradio.com.
Have you checked out the SOR Spacewire at spacedoutradio.com yet? Every day we post the latest stories regarding the weird, strange, and completely unbelievable. From cryptid and UFO sightings to the conspiracy world, we tackle it all. Hi there, I'm Eric Markham, Spaced Out Radio's news director for the SOR Spacewire. And if you have a story, I want to hear it. Email me at news@spacedoutradio.com.
Patrolling the Pacific Northwest, we are always on the lookout for the strange and unassuming stories that real people are experiencing. Hi, I'm Vincent Zunza from Pacific North Weird. Me and Alexandra Sullivan have teamed to bring to you those odd stories that never seem to make it into the mainstream. Stories so weird that will leave you scratching your head wondering, is this real? It's as real as it gets with Pacific North Weird. You can watch our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Become more intimate and interactive with Spaced Out Radio. Join our Space Travelers Club with your new membership. For $5 a month, we'll provide you with special access to the website, monthly prize draws from books to psychic readings, along with monthly newsletter, private interviews, and more. Sign up today to be part of Spaced Out Radio's experience.
Every month on Spaced Out Radio, we look into the deep and dark reports of cryptids roaming around the world with me, Rob Morphy from Cryptopia.us. I would love it if you would join me and host Dave Scott as we delve into the most arcane stories and reports regarding creatures of the unknown. My job is to hunt down the details and bring the evidence forward to you. These aren't your regular Bigfoot stories I'm talking about either. You can find out more about crypto history at spacedoutradio.com.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
Did you know that Spaced Out Radio runs 7 days a week? Hi, it's James Tyson from Spaced Out Weekend. Every Saturday and Sunday night, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, you can join me and my guests for some great chatter about what's going on out in the universe, or even in that dark part of the basement you really don't want to go back into. Well, let's find the answers to your experiences together. So come on up to Uncle Jimbo's cabin on the weekend. For more information, look us up at spacedoutradio.com.
Would you'd like to connect with us on Spaced Out Radio, head to spacedoutradio.com to check out the latest shows, guests, and sponsors. And don't forget to sign up for the Space Travelers Club. You'll find all you need at spacedoutradio.com. Welcome back to the final hour of Space Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Good to have you along for the ride as we continue on here on this Thursday night with Sean David Morton. Before we bring Sean back on, I do want to remind you, tomorrow night on the show, it's the first Friday of the month, we are going to talk the ET Connection with our Keith Andrews. He comes in the first Friday of the month to talk everything extraterrestrial. I highly suggest you hook up with us at spaceoutradio.com, 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can do so at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, I can be followed at Dave Scott, SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn. You can also download our shows on iTunes. We're so happy about that, to finally be there. We're getting a ton of downloads on that. And of course, our website is spacedoutradio.com. While there, you can sign up for the SOR Space Travelers Club. You can read up on our latest blogs, read up on our newswire, listen to some Bumblefoot, the main music of this show. And of course, if you've had an interesting experience you can't explain and you want someone to investigate, Mike Schmidt is waiting for you to fill out an SOR Sightlines report. Remember, if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, it is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Do us a favor, visit freedomslips.com, donate today. And Bill Cardwell has finally arrived. His password for tonight, prognostication. Prognostication is your SOR Space Travelers password of the night. You have to be a member of the Space Travelers Club to use it, and if you are, you know what to do with it. Sean David Morton is our guest tonight. Sean, welcome back.
Hey, how are you?
I tell you, man, I really had to decompress after that last hour talking about Bob Lazar. That is some heavy stuff, man.
Well, that's where it all starts. I mean, it's, you know, I just happen to be at the cutting edge of, you know, a lot of this crazy stuff. So it's, so yeah, thanks for listening. You know, this is really the history of this movement. It's the history of, you know, my going out to Area 51 and, you know, just being out there running around in the middle of the night with my friends and having no one to talk to. We would go up to Joe and Pat's Little Ailey Inn, and there was a phone booth out there, and we started calling Art Bell because he was the only guy that was up late enough to talk to us, and two, he's the only one that would take our calls. And it became a phenomenon. I mean, it's after I got done investigating all this stuff and working on sightings and, you know, going to the executive producers of sightings and saying, look, I have 600 hours of videotape on beta that could fuel your show for the next 10 years if you want. I mean, I've been everywhere. I know everybody. And Paul Hall, the executive producer, basically shoved, well, both myself and Linda Moulton Howe really, you know, out of the whole production, where he said, well, Sean, we want to hire producers that don't know anything. Those are his exact words, that don't know anything. And I'm like, what, you think because I've investigated this phenomenon that I'm not a good journalist, that I don't know what's fake and what isn't? And he was like, well, you know, we're going to get people. And I ran into the same problem when I was working on Strange Universe. They hired people that worked on 60 Minutes that didn't know anything about the phenomenon. So when we went to pilot on Strange Universe, we did 5 shows on Strange Universe, and every single segment was something that I did or wrote or put together, which is what got Strange Universe on the air, because I was working with a bunch of guys who, you know, who thought a piece of Bigfoot hair was interesting, or will an asteroid hit the planet? And I'm like, you know, but it gave me the opportunity to investigate all this stuff and actually get paid for it. I mean, it was, you know, I worked on hard copy and Mysteries, Magic, and Miracles and Strange Universe and, you know, all these, the original Strange Universe TV show and Unsolved Mysteries. I mean, they gave me the money to go out and get an E&G crew and go investigate stuff. So I was on the cutting edge of the investigations of, gosh, not just Area 51, but the Chupacabra. I did the first stories on the Chupacabra. I ran around Puerto Rico for 2 weeks chasing this weird little dinosaur creature through the trees, which is absolutely real, and then spread up into Mexico, up into the United States. Infected the Griffith Park Zoo, and they faked a fire, and they had they moved all the animals out, and they had this weird, like hazmat team come in, and I mean, there was all kinds of there's all kinds of really spooky stuff behind the scenes. But we did the first national stories on the Phoenix Lights. We did TWA Flight 800, the assassination of JFK Jr. by Hillary Clinton. That's a whole other story. We at Hard Copy actually found the white Fiat Uno that was complicit in the assassination of Princess Diana. I mean, so I got, I was at the cutting edge of all these different stories. The assassination of John Lennon. We did some revolutionary stuff with the Reagan assassination attempt, which got covered up, and so we had we started actually. We had the first original program on something called the Sci-Fi Channel. So I was actually one of the guys that was one of the original producers that became the Sci-Fi Channel, and so it's just all way back in the day. And I was just trying to get this out there, and it's nice to see that everybody has kind of followed in this weird path that I've cut, and and I'm the one that gets all the flack. I'm the one that gets all the smear from all the trolls for just trying to help people understand what's out there. So anyway,
that's our job, though. Our job is to be that asshole. Pardon the language, but our job is, the minute we signed up to go public with this, we took on that responsibility. I got blasted on Facebook in one 9/11 group last night by this troll who had never even heard this show, but was absolutely carving me the show, saying that I'm a liar and everything. And finally, the moderator cut it off. But I mean, that's what we signed up for, unfortunately.
If you're not taking heat, you're not close to the fire. That's a good thing. So take that as the red badge of courage, my friend.
I plan on that.
It gets worse.
Oh, I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will. Sean, you mentioned that we went to the moon in 1953.
Yep.
This opens up a whole can of worms on the secret space program, where we've been, where we haven't been. My question to you is this. I have had people on this show, from Randy Kramer to other people who study the secret space program, and it's probably one of my favorite topics. When I go to bed at night after this show, I actually go on YouTube and put my headphones in and fall asleep listening to stories about the secret space program. Do you believe that we have traveled to other planets outside of our own moon?
Well, yes, we have. There was so we have a moon base currently. We at the northern Arctic regions of the moon. There is water. There is atmosphere. Actually, we're not being told the true nature of what the moon is. And we did go to the moon. And yes, there was some publicity stuff that was done by Stanley Kubrick and other things, just in case we failed, or just in case. Once again, no Bucks, no Buck Rogers. But there were other purposes as to why we went. But what they're not telling you is the nature of the moon itself. Them telling you, the astronauts couldn't survive and the temperature and all this other stuff. Well, they're basically falsifying the nature of what the moon is. Well, that's number one. Number two, yes, we went to the moon. Let me just complete the story about what happened with Eisenhower. We landed on the moon with the National Security Agency, basically using German technology at that time. When we captured Nazi Germany, we had to rewrite our technical manuals. We had to put in 750,000 new words for stuff we didn't even have words for as far as technology goes, because we're talking the V2 rocket, we're talking jet engines. The Germans had actually already developed the atomic bomb by the time we took them over, which is what allowed us to develop the atomic bomb and then go use it on the Japanese. But what Eisenhower was warned about was he was warned about atomic weapons basically knocking the Earth off its orbit, which is exactly what they have done, which I was explaining what happened with the magnetic north marching towards true north, which then mysteriously stopped when Obama and this posse of like 93 guys that he takes around with him all go to Oslo, Norway, and this weird thing happens in the sky called the Oslo Spiral. And I can tell you for a fact, I mean, I've done all the research on this, on the power capabilities, what we did, how they use something called IceCat, which is the European Incoherent Scattered Technology Array. Which is the European version of HARP, and it's all up in Norway. And this thing is basically like a death beam that can create a 0-point energy black hole between here and the sun. And what they're worried about is, number one, they're worried about the sun going crazy, emitting solar flares that could cause what they call a Z-pitch action, which 14,400 years ago wiped out all life on Earth as we know it, with the exception of about 2,000 people, and is chronicled in all the Aboriginal Aboriginal rock paintings. And it's proven by science, and they can pinpoint it to when it happened. So there's a whole bunch of stuff we're using to actually shut the sun down, to basically use 0-point energy black holes to bring effluviance off the sun, and the sun goes quiet and completely quiescent for 2 or 3 years every time we do it. The weird thing about it was that after the Norway spiral, the magnetic north of the Earth took a hard right turn, and has now moved somewhere to the tune of about 1,600 kilometers, and now magnetic north is in the middle of the Siberian Sea. So it's circling magnetic north now, which means they've either stopped it from meeting, where they were saying like 60% of the time the planet would flip, or there would be an electromagnetic flip of the planet. And if the poles actually shifted, it means everything connected to a ground wire would fry. So Eisenhower's getting a talking to about atomic weapons, and you better not go off this planet, and again, you're quarantined for a reason, et cetera, et cetera. Then they warned him and said there's another race of beings out there that you may want to watch out for, called the Greys, and they're going to come talking to you as well. And our advice is you better not do what they have to say, or it'll end in tears. So November of 1953, this was the first meeting was February. November of 53, the Greys come a knocking, and their whole thing is, well, we don't care if you blow up atomic bombs. We don't, look, we'll give you technology and parse it out to you if you give us people, and for supposed genetic experimentations and all that. Now we found out that they were doing some of that, but the rest of it was the reason the Dulce War actually happened is because the mole men, and this is where Phil Schneider and his guys come through, were actually digging the tunnels to complete the rocket trains that are underground. These super high speed 800-mile-an-hour trains that have the porcelain skin on the outside and the whole thing that then crisscross the country underground. They broke into an abattoir underneath Dulce, where there were hundreds of thousands of bleached bones, where we're finding that they were actually abducting people and boiling them down into soup, which is what then triggered the Reagan administration to finally go in and clean out Dulce, somewhere around 86 or 87 or so. But the Greys came along, and that whole program started happening with the abductions and them taking people and all that, which then led to something in 64 called the Sigma Treaty, in which we gave them underground bases and facilities, and we in essence let them infest Dulce below level 4. And there was a Nordic named Lord Tugi, who was actually operating as a human alien liaison at Dulce. And there were 2 accidents there. There was one in 77 where we lost about, I think, 4 guys, and in a misunderstanding where they got blasted by these boogies down there. And then it finally got to the point where we just said, no, we've got to get these guys off the planet. And still, if you look at the dark aspect of this, that there are people in the government who believe that something big and very nasty is on its way here, and that it'll get here at some point in the early to the mid 2020s. And it's kind of interesting because when I listen to what they have to say about whatever's on its way, it perfectly matches with biblical prophecy of Michael the archangel representing the Pleiadians and the Whites and whatever else, that they have a war in heaven with the red dragon. And the dragon is always known as it's the constellation of Alpha Draconis. And Alpha Draconis, if you look at the time code in the Great Pyramid of Giza, the fall of man is actually timed to when the downward path in the Great Pyramid directly aligns with the North Star in, I think, 2600 BC or so. And that the North Star at that time is actually Thuban, which is the homeworld capital of the Alpha Draconian Empire. Here's one other interesting part of this that I was told. I had a UFO contactee friend who called himself Adrien, and look, this guy had the best picture. He had pictures of him getting on the ships. He had pictures taken out the window of the ships. He had pictures of his girlfriend climbing up into the ships, and we tried everything that we could do to popularize this guy's case. I mean, his stuff made the Billy Meyer stuff just look sick and stupid. He had film. We gave him a camera, let him wander out into the Nevada desert for about 2 hours, and he came back with a giant tubular mothership that then, opened a square portal and then disappeared in the portal. I mean, this guy was amazing. And and every single time we pitched him or tried to get a network on this or he would never give us the rights to his stuff. We would have to actually like pull business cards out of his hands, because when it came to business, this guy would literally like crawl over his mother to screw his sister. It was weird. So, he eventually just disappeared back into Germany. Actually, he came from Cuba and he was actually in Miami. And after we helped him out and got him money and, all this other stuff, he basically just kind of disappeared into Germany. And we haven't seen him again. But I'll send you some of the photos, which are just spectacular of his case. All right, so where are we going with this? So that was the Eisenhower stuff, where it progressed, and as it stands now, we have bases on the moon. We have Cape Malabar radio, and all of this extraterrestrial stuff. And I'll tell you one other thing I actually saw with my own eyes out of 5-1. That was we'd see the ships, and we'd see the saucers all coming up. One night, myself and my buddy John Hadley, who was murdered a couple of years after this, we were out there, and there was an object that was coming in from space. This was, I think, August of '92, and whatever it was, I live in Hermosa Beach, and this thing flew over my house a couple of times where the roof started shaking. We saw all the light fixtures started shaking with the roof, and then the windows, and then the floor, and then the base of the building. And the strange part about it was like an earthquake in reverse. So we turned on the TV, and there's Paul Moyer on Channel 7 saying that whatever this thing was traveling at Mach 25 over Southern California, and that it landed at the mysterious Area 51 base, and the military denies all knowledge of it. And then you had Kate Hutton from Caltech come on and say, yeah, we're calling them skyquakes. And they're just all laughing it off. They were trying to say it was two objects coming in, creating these big sonic booms that were traveling at Mach 25 and then landing at 5-1. My friend John Hadley and I were out there where this object that flew over our heads looked like, if you think of the destroyers, the big giant Darth Vader destroyer in Star Wars, it was 1,600 feet from tip to tail. It had a big blunt shovel nose on the front of it. It was cut in half where it was black on the bottom and then silvery or white on the top, with what looked like vents, and then the back end of it looked like a 66 Corvette. It was scooped up and had three big retros on the back of it. And this thing was being followed by, chase jet aircraft and helicopters. I mean, a whole fleet of stuff around it that looked like little tiny, like Hot Wheels cars, around this ship. And it flew over our heads. And the thing came in from the south. It came right over our heads along 375, came over Rachel, and then landed going the opposite way because it just hung in the air and then went behind Bald Mountain. And that was the only time the Wackenhut guys ever chased us, because they thought we had video of it. And John and I jumped in his truck. He had all the lights disconnected in his truck. He had this night vision goggles on. So we're doing 120 miles an hour down this desert road in pitch blackness, with me screaming my lungs out, with him looking like this weird demented bug with his night vision goggles. And we actually made the town of Rachel and skidded into like a wood pile and threw a tarp over the truck and ran into one of the trailers and, pulled guns and put the table up. And the guys came up, they were looking all around for us, and they just came up and they tried the door and then they went away. So that was the end of the adventure. But when you consider that was what we had back in, and then years later on Discovery Channel, actually John called me on the phone and said, hey, turn on this TV show. And we turned it on, and there it was. And it was the same design, but they were saying that it would be flying in like 2035. And then it was like the X-66, which was the design with the blunt shovel nose on it. So I've come to learn, and this is also in my book, my Sands of Time book, Isomer Protocol, that as of like 2004, we had, and that ship was actually called the USS Grissom. And then we have two destroyer class, which are the Alan Shepard and the John Glenn. And then we've got more of them now, but we have four of the big black triangular Viper ships that are capable of just below, 0.8 of light speed. It's interesting because when they fly, they get in what they call a trough. And they don't really understand it, but the trough itself, when you get into this, you're sort of right in between dimensional space, and it allows you to travel at amazing speeds. The Grissom and the other ships have, they've been at least out to the. I'd interviewed guys who claims that we had ships that went to the edge of Pluto way back in like 74, as an example. Now, here's the challenge. The challenge is that after the Dulce Wars, and after all this crazy stuff happening in the late 80s and early 90s, we supposedly entered into another treaty with this gang called the Andromedan Council, and they represent the Pleiadians, the Arcturians, Altarians, I think. It's a group of these ETs. And it was basically called the Isomer Protocol. This is what my latest book is about. The Isomer Protocol stands for the Isolation Memorandum, that we are not allowed to go out into space yet, that we are considered a fallen world, and that until we either grow up or spiritually begin to ascend somehow, some way, along with a group of other planets in this system, that we're not really allowed, off this planet. Now, I know you've got all these other people who are talking about, we got big bases on Mars. I'm convinced there's somebody else on Mars, and that's the reason why we don't have bases there. We definitely have a base on the moon. We have Cape Malabar radio on the moon. And everything transmits on a secondary frequency that started out with NASA as a medical frequency that's based on lasers. So there's a direct line of sight that actually does this, but it just drops beneath the communication grid that we have here in the United States, or we have here in the world. It was interesting because the beginnings of the moon base actually started in the early 60s with a guy by the name of General Arthur Trudeau. And General Trudeau actually had something called Project Horizon. And if you understand the progression of the space program of what was supposed to happen, what was supposed to happen was we were supposed to build a space station. Then we would build a fleet of space shuttles that would then be serviced by the space station. Then the shuttles would be able to take on water and fuel at the space station. And then it's a pretty easy trek to be able to then land on the moon. Now, Trudeau's whole thing was, and this was all in Philip Corso's book, by the way, The Day After Roswell, is that we would then send up modular housing, like big motorhomes, if you will. We'd send all these up. They'd sort of crash land or come down in a certain area. Then you would have a lunar rover, the car, would then be able to drag all these units together, and then the astronauts would work to then connect these things together to create sort of a dome, if you will. One of the things we learned about the moon is that the lunar soil is stunningly fecund. It is. Chris Kraft, who was the head of NASA at the time, there was a little documentary that they did. I think I saw it once on the TV that was done by Disney, where he put just a little bit of this soil into some kind of ivy plant, and the ivy plant just went insane. It went crazy. It took over the lab in like a couple of days. This thing just grew, like the Little Shop of Horrors plant. So we can definitely plant things and do things up on the moon. But the challenge with the moon is that there's a huge number of structures on the moon. The moon actually came from outside our solar system. We believe that actually the moon was kind of a space arc that came from an exploding star called Epsilon Eridani, and then it brought the Asiatic races here. The moon is interesting because it was powered when it was placed in orbit, and it absolutely was placed in orbit. It's as large as the planet Mercury. It's the second largest moon in our solar system, and it was powered face first. You can see on the backside of the moon, I believe it's called the Tsaroslavsky crater, but there's a perfectly etched hexagon on the back of the moon that looks like a stop sign. And that's where the Swiss Army knives of this solar system that you see all over the place, instead of being the monoliths from 2001, are these huge hexagonal tubes. The Russians took all kinds of photos of them actually loading gear of some kind off the artificial moon of Phobos. Phobos and Demnos, which are the two, Phobos is artificial. I'm not so sure about Demnos, but, around Mars. So there's somebody else up on Mars. And this was Marina Popovich that actually brought the photos from Russia, and we sponsored her to come over here and actually had all these photos of this huge 1.6 mile long tube eating, literally physically eating one of the Russian space probes. But whatever these things are, they're these big tubes. And they seem to be all over the universe. They are quite possibly creating the rings of Saturn by processing all the stuff actually there. But they actually powered the moon face first into a perfectly circular orbit around Earth. Because if the moon had an elliptical orbit, in other words, if it swung around, then we'd have 3,000-foot tidal waves all across the planet, just ringing the planet, and life could not exist here. So it's perfectly parked in orbit, in a perfectly circular orbit. It's powered here face first, which is why you have all the lunar stuff. All the craters are on the front, not the back. And the moon is, and we discovered this when the Apollo 13 actually crashed in the lunar surface, and we had sensors on Apollos 11 and 12 The moon is a spherical. It's a huge titanium yttrium sphere, and we know this because we just did the math on the sound. Because it rang like a bell. Walter Cronkite said, the moon rang like a bell when the Apollo 13 retro package. For 8 hours, the moon just went when we smashed into it. And there was quite possibly some kind of bomb actually on Apollo 13 as well, which is why it made such a cool sound. But it's covered with about 28 miles of dirt, which is mostly iron oxide. And if you mine the surface of the moon and get about a ton of iron oxide, you can crush it and get about 3/4 of a ton of oxygen. So it's it's very interesting, and there's all kinds of glass structures all over the moon as well. But as far as our moving out, in 2004, we broke the Isomer Protocol Treaty by basically because the Altarians actually got pissed off because we scuttled we actually sent stuff up to scuttle an Altarian ship on Mars, and then when the Altarians find out we went to Mars to get their ship, we actually tried to crack open one of these circular sondes, and it exploded. And the Altarians came to find out what the hell was going on, and we basically went toe to toe with these guys. And it was actually our development of time travel and our ability to actually open gaps in space to be able to, because once you travel interdimensionally, you're then conquering time at the same time. That it was this threat that actually told the Andromeda Council and the Altarians that, basically piss off and, don't mess with us anymore. And so after 2004, 2006, I'm pretty sure we began moving out into the galaxy, out into the solar system and doing a lot more with what we're doing. But the only other things I can think of is that there was an exchange program with a planet called Serpo in the Zeta Reticulan star field. We sent 14 guys there, and only 12 of them came back. Which is really kind of a shame because these people are heroes and ambassadors and all this. And there was a book actually written about it. And I've been friends with so many contactees with Hal Wilcox, who was one of the most famous contactees in the 60s. He was a teacher and mentor of mine, but he had physical proof of photographs and geological samples and all this of him living on another planet for a period of time. And then, of course, people like Adrienne and Billy Meyer and just the weird part about this is that, and here's the challenge in all of this, Dave, and this is what you're going to find is the real frustration. John Lear warned me saying, look, when you get into this, the more you know, the less you know. And that eventually you're just running through a swamp of luminous weeds where suddenly you just always run into a black cone. You run into a huge wall where you can't figure out what's on the other side of it. So the only way to find out what is to talk to the people that claim that they've been to the other side of it. And yet the more people that you interview, the weirder the experiences get. And there doesn't seem to be a connecting tissue of any of this. It doesn't seem to be as if there's it's like there's no cosmology. There's no Jesus. There's no singular religion, if you will. They're all giving us different information. They all have different visions of the future. They constantly lie to us to tell us that what they're doing to us is either good for us or we're special or in the case of Alice Haggerty, who was one of the best abductee cases I'd ever studied. Alice had 2 probes up in her head. You could see the ends of the probe coming out the roof of her mouth. She had eyewitnesses of her husband, her daughter, and she was being taken for basically eggs, and they were breeding this whole species based off her on the ship. And the commander of the ship, she said, was a Mayan Indian, this 6'6" Mayan Indian that they'd taken out of time from the Mayans because the Mayans knew time. They knew the universe. They knew the galaxy. And he was the commander of whatever was going on this craft, where she was constantly being abducted and taking eggs. And, they were breeding like a whole hybrid race in this, on the ship. And she was shown visions of the future, of the destruction of the earth, and that this is why she was being told to do this. And unfortunately, as she lived her life, she was in a car accident. She busted her neck. And not only did the aliens not heal her, but they were just like, oh, well, you'll figure out how to fix yourself. It's just, they all sort of end in tragedy, because of the mocking that they get from society or, I go up against people and the first thing they say is, oh, you're one of those UFO weirdos. And I was like, well, I got paid to actually investigate certain aspects of this phenomenon. That goes all the way back to Area 51. And if you're talking about the ascension of mankind, Area 51 is key because one of the things that Bob Lazar was so valuable talking about, and by the way, nothing that Bob Lazar ever said was ever disproven. Nothing, as far as his science goes, going all the way up to the periodic table of charts, and to, as we went forward, him talking about even the elemental table being unstable up until you get to 114, 115, then it magically stabilizes, and then it becomes antimatter after that. Everything he said was true. Everything he said was true, and we found out later. Now we're up to, I think, element 135, and I think Lazar was saying the government table of the elements went to as much as, I think, 150 or so. But the whole trick of all of this is that once you understand what gravity is, not what it does, because that's Einstein and that's Newton. They've got all the theories on what it does. But once you understand what it is, and you can create gravity as a wave, just like you would create a microwave or a gamma ray or an X-ray, suddenly everything opens up. Because once you understand gravity, now you understand time. And once you and once you can deal with mass without worrying about how much something weighs, now you can float whole cities up into the stratosphere if you want. You can float, you can float all kinds of stuff up into the stratosphere, and it means the end of hunger. It means the end of shortages of power. It means that you can turn, huge deserts of this place into magnificent green velds, because now you have unlimited power. If you had a box that just had a wheel in it that just spun forever, you could connect that to your car, to your house, to whatever. But you also then release the choke points of energy, and this is how you control populations. They've totally let the internet out of the box. I mean, DARPA invents the internet, and the internet gets out of the box somehow, and now we have no choke points on information anymore, which is another reason why Donald Trump is doing so well. And you don't have you don't have the 6 guys who control the 25,000 forms of media in the world. Now you've got guys like me and guys like you that are just out of the box running around speaking the truth, and they can't stand that. So what does it become? It doesn't. You don't attack the message. You attack the messenger. So oh, you're a freak, or you're this, or you live in the woods, or your wife is Bigfoot, or whatever it is. They'll come up with all the smear because they'll just attack you personally. But so that's where it's going. It's a very interesting, controlled release of information as we're going on. And after 2012, the greatest thing that I can see is that now that the veil has been removed, and that's the true apocalypse. The true apocalypse is that which is hidden being finally revealed. That now that there's a veil that's been lifted off the right-hand side of the brain. Well, the whole right side of the brain thinks in terms of symbols, colors, archetypes, fluidic movement. It's the feminine side of the brain, but it also thinks in terms of quantum time. So we're getting closer and closer and closer to the 5th dimensional reality, where that which we think actually then becomes physical reality. And that's the essence of time travel, really. I mean, you can time travel all the time. If you use remote viewing, there's a series of exercises you can use. You can travel in the past. You can go to the future. You can see what your past lives are. You see what your future lives are. And I've done it and come back with very accurate information from various points in the future. So it all comes together at some point where you have an intersection of mind, of spirit, of all of this, where now we're starting to see the truth. Nobody can hide anything. Nobody can hide emails. Nobody can hide their skullduggery. Nobody can hide their criminality, which Hillary Clinton is discovering. And I'm hoping that the American people discover in time. So there you go. That's my thing.
Well, let me ask you this then, because you know of Randy Kramer, you know of Max Spears, and all these people who say we have been to Mars, we fought on Mars. Andrew Bashago says he was there with old Barry Soetoro back in the day. Are these people just under mind control, or do you believe that they may have actually been there?
I don't know. I have no opinion. They're not hurting anybody. If they want to tell their stories, that's fine. I met Andrew Bassaggio. He's a very nice man. And then he starts telling you how he was going to be president of the United States in 2016. And you're like, okay, thanks, Andy. Thanks for that. They just take one step off the, I've been to the building, by the way, that he talks about, where they had the jump room to Mars. And I knew people that worked there for years. And it's just the whole thing, the whole story he tells about 999 Sepulveda Boulevard. Yes, it looks like 666 when you're coming down, but the top floor, I knew people that worked there. I knew the offices and businesses were there. I mean, I've lived in this neighborhood all my life, and he is not telling the truth about the location of where it was. So there's that. I also give you people who claim that they've been to the future, and yet nothing they've actually predicted has happened. I interviewed this John Titor too. I'm going to be at a time travel conference. Actually, the time travel conference is going to be November 13th up in Petaluma. So everybody come. It's timetravel.com, timetravel.con. Actually look it up because, we've got a group up there, and I'm going to be speaking with him. And again, the stuff that he tells me about, first off, if a lot of these people actually were doing what they said they did, and if they were coming out and talking about it, I guarantee you that there is a mind control program, a self-destruct switch, if you will, that the minute these people started talking about these secret programs, they would literally be forced to kill themselves. So, when you understand the people that are really going to it. So, I would just like to see if any of these people are doing what they claim. My friends went to Mars and all they brought me back was this lousy T-shirt. Can you take a picture? Can you take your phone? Can you take a rock sample? Can you bring anything back that actually proves that you've done what you say? Because as far as I know, looking at the technology, understanding it, yes, we have the capabilities of doing it, but there are forces out there that are stopping us. We are a fallen world. We are considered diseased by the rest of the universe. And there's a whole galaxy out there that really doesn't like us much. So it really does. I mean, if you read C.S. Lewis back in the day, C.S. Lewis talked about how Earth was Malcandra, that we were the silent planet. I'm sorry, Mars was Malcandra, that we were whatever else, but we were the silent planet because we were cut off from the rest of the, I guess you would say, extraterrestrial entities. And, I'm not so sure. And even the benevolent experiences that people have had with extraterrestrials on this planet have turned out to be, not so good for the people. I mean, if you look at Billy Meyer's life, or you look at the people that have attacked him, or, I've had a lot of interactions with people who are Pleiadian contactees, and I can tell you that the Pleiadians have really rotten taste in people. So, look, it's all fun to believe, and I'd love to see the proof of it all. And, I've seen what they have in terms of the saucers, in terms of the ships. So, anything's possible. And, but as far as us fighting and doing stuff on Mars, I think there's something and someone else there. And I think that there is someone that up to about 2004 to 2006 was limiting us to this planet. We could do unmanned exploration all we like, but they are still afraid that we are, once again, a virus or a disease that could spread to the other planets in the solar system. That's my opinion. And I'm not calling anybody liars. I'm just saying that I've done my research to, I'm the guy that slept in the dirt. I'm the one that's been shot at by helicopters. I'm the guy that's, had his friends killed. I don't see any of these people getting the same consequences that I've had for their information. And again, I really just ask them, okay, prove something, predict something. Give me a rock, give me a picture, give me, whatever. I mean, with Hal Wilcox went to another planet, took pictures, took rock samples, took all kinds of stuff to actually prove he was there. And none of these guys, as far as I can see, and you can bash on me all you want. All I'm asking of any of them is, give me some proof.
Explain a little bit, if you don't mind, Apollo missions 18, 19, and 20.
They were mostly, the 18, 19, and 20 missions were the actual patch for Apollo 18, which I have actually, was some kind of alien structure on the moon. There was a bunch of stuff that we wanted to take a look at. There was also like a race of beings up on the moon that were immensely tall. Were huge. I mean, we're talking like 300 feet high. But there were alien structures that we wanted to take a look at. They were the Apollo 18 patch actually had a what looked like Stonehenge on it with a certain star chart on it. But there were things that we wanted to explore. We basically sort of abandoned the other Apollo missions. Actually were using a different type of technology as well, which is another reason why that's when we stopped using the chemical rockets and all that and started actually using the saucer ships and all that. But there's still other things up there. There's still a lot of weird things that are actually inside the moon. And once again, I do believe that I think that we're an amazing place in space, that you have all these different races that come here. You have the Caucasoid races that come from the that come primarily from the Pleiades. The Pleiades is, even though it looks like 7 stars from here, is actually like over 200 very, very old blue-white stars, and there's like 147 billion people that live in this one cluster. And the Pleiadians are all descended from the Lyrans that were sort of these blonde giants. But then you have on this planet, you have the Caucasoid races are Pleiadian and Lyran. The black races are from Sirius A. The copper or red races were from Sirius B. And then the yellow and Asiatic races were from Epsilon Eridani, which then went supernova, exploded, I think about 100,000 years ago. Eric von Daniken talks about it quite a bit, but that the moon is a space ark. Basically, it was abandoned in orbit, and then was what gave rise to the Chinese civilization, who always talked about the Great Pearl in the sky, and that they were. We actually called them in the United States. We didn't say they were from China. We called them the Celestials, actually, because back then it was called Cathay by the Carthay. I'm sorry, by the British. So so there's all these races that come from all these different places to use Earth. Very much as a school, if you will. So there's a 7,000 year or 7-day evolution that's described by the time code in the Great Pyramid of Giza. That's all about the bestowal of a number of messianic figures. Buddha was the first one. Christ was the second one. The next one that's going to come actually gives a whole series of predictions that it's going to be a female Messiah who's born somewhere around 2034. And actually comes to power on October 31st of 2039. So right now we're in what the pyramid describes as a 40-year exodus period, beginning in February of 1999 and then ending on Halloween, October 31st. And of course, the significance of Halloween and why it's kept as a holiday is because at that time in 2039, you have a lot of people that die between now and then. And now it's the resurrection of the quick and the dead, which is the return of universal reincarnation. That's the resurrection of the quick and the dead. It's everybody that's ever lived here now, preparing for, I guess, what you would call the final exam, the final test, which might be why so many UFOs are here, because it's all our parents and grandparents all trying to get a good seat at the graduation.
It's one way to look at it, in very intriguing way.
Thanks.
We got about 15 minutes left.
Okay.
And I would like to get into some time travel because you're going to Lorian Fenton's group here, and Lorian's a big fan of this show as well. And
we're all big fans of yours, Dave. You're doing great work here.
Oh, well, thank you.
Late at night, the middle of the night. You're doing a fantastic job.
Well, somebody's got to be awake.
Yeah, somebody.
Besides truckers and myself, and my addicted space travelers.
Nice.
But when it comes to time travel, you did mention John Titor, and that's the hot button of anybody who listened to C2C. And, that is the one person that we're all clinging on to see whether or not if he's real. Now, there is a gentleman on social media who claims to be the real John Titor. Do you believe John Titor truly existed and came back in time?
The story is plausible. John Titor 2 is what he calls. I mean, I interviewed John Titor 2 for, a couple of hours, and I was, I'm sort of, you know how it is, David. You're kind of a skeptic, and, you have these people on who tell these crazy stories, and you're presenting them to the public. You don't want to believe or disbelieve. You're just trying to say, I'm an impartial, imparter of information, if you will. All right. So the John Titor thing was interesting because he had some photographs of a device that looked plausible that was being built by General Electric, and of course General Electric and General Dynamics and General Atomics are all part of GE, which owns NBC, or did own NBC anyway. And it looked plausible. What he was talking about was that he talked about how in 2034 that basically the source code, the computer source code for all of civilization is based on crap, is based on an outhouse. Please remember that Bill Gates sold his computer idea to IBM before he actually had a computer that actually had an operating system. So he ran around and found the first guy he could find, paid him $25,000, which was a lot of money back then, to get DOS. And so eventually the entire system that's based on PC is going to collapse at some point. So it's an interesting thing where they put the collapse off until 2034. And then the John Titor story is that everything goes boink. And then he's sent back in time to find an old IBM computer that speaks in all these different languages, which he finds at a flea market or something in like 1974. But he gave a series of predictions, none of which happened. He gave a series of things about a timeline leading up to his timeline, which turned out to be absolutely untrue. Now he's saying that somehow the timeline has shifted or changed, so he has to then jump back to 1974 to then go back along the timeline of his timeline, where the events happened. So as far as his veracity goes in actually describing future events, nothing happened. John Teeter 2, he's got a book out there and the whole thing, and yet he's still talking about us using combustion engines in 2050. It seems as though he's taken a whole bunch of left-wing conspiracy theories about climate change and all that. The waters are going to rise and that, we're all going to choke in our own filth and, all of this, and simply progress them forward. And then it's just, I talk to guys that know, insider guys that know, who just basically laugh the story off. Now, time travel is real. It is something that's happened. They do have a man-portable device. I actually, in my book, if you guys are interested in the Eisner Protocol, which is Sands of Time Book 3, I give the entire theory of working time travel, of how it's done. There's a device that was a backpack that then was turned into a smaller sort of cell phone pager-like device that you wear on your belt that allows you to jump through the holes in time. The biggest thing the government was worried about was these massive rips in the space-time continuum that started with the Nazis and the Nazi Bell, and then got even bigger and grander and larger with the Philadelphia experiment that ripped all these holes in 20-year increments throughout the time stream, which has now allowed another universe to invade us. And this is why all this invasion, all this UFO stuff started happening right during the war. And with Roswell, and I'm convinced that 2 ships actually just dropped out of a rip in the space-time continuum, and then got blasted by the RX-47 microwave towers in New Mexico, because we were trying to figure out a way to shoot these things down. And that's when the Roswell incident, people don't understand, the first ship exploded and crashed into the second ship, which is what gave the whole big field of debris on Mac Brazel's ranch. And the second ship actually then fluttered down and crashed in Corona, which is where you get all the big stories about the aliens that were alive. And it was from that ship that, once again, the Foreign Technology Division of the Pentagon and General Arthur Trudeau, they pulled lasers, they pulled integrated circuit boards, they pulled night vision, they pulled the basics for computers and all that. That ship falling out of the sky basically dragged us into the 20th century. Now, as far as time travel goes, in college, Dr. Fred Bell, I used to call him Uncle Fred because I've known him since I was like 5 years old. But Fred graduated the University of Michigan at 14 and was working on time fields and actually exploding things. We were trying to study the heart of atomic blasts because you have time dilation at the center of any explosive field. And we were studying that and how we would actually open that to be able to travel through time. And this is what the experiments of Montauk were all about. They had something there called the Beast, where we've had teleportation, which is actually a form of time travel going from one point to another. We've had mass-moving teleportation since the early 60s. The challenge has been that we could not teleport, nor could we travel through time, organic matter. So, and I helped build a time machine in Fred Bell's backyard. This thing was 4 stories high, and it looked like 2 pyramids, one on top of the other. And this thing worked. We plugged it into the power grid of the city and turned it on twice with Fred inside of it. And I watched this entire structure disappear before my eyes twice. And we had to take Fred to the hospital each time because he was messed up. He was bleeding out of his nose, out of his ears, out of his eyes, because he jumped forward. Now it's time travel, and we only got like just a few minutes to talk about it, but time travel is all about vibration. And so if you and I could go back and vibrate at the same frequency as we did when we started the show, we would actually jump back to that point in time, because everything's about vibration. But if you and I were actually vibrating at the vibration of now, and we jumped forward into time space, still vibrating at this vibration, what Fred Bell discovered when in this, him jumping into the future just a few minutes, when he got out of the machine and looked around, everything was a purple construct. Everything was like an unfinished hologram. He said it looked like being in a huge architectural diagram. He was looking at the world as unfinished, and you began to realize that creation isn't behind us moving forward. It's as we interact with it, that as you move forward. Now, there's time viewing, which is very easy. If you and I could jump 10,000 light years away and then have a telescope to look back on Earth, we would actually be seeing the light and the sound we would be seeing 10,000 years ago of what was going on. Maybe they're building a pyramid, or 2,000 years ago we could see the crucifixion of Christ, because sound and light actually still exist. Every time we walk outside, we're looking at the stars as they were millions, possibly billions of years ago. So there's time viewing in such a way where they can actually fix a point in space off the planet, however far, and then look back on the Earth and actually see events in time. The challenge is when you're traveling backwards in time, and this is where it gets weird. You're jumping out of the river, literally the time stream, up onto the shore, which is another medium altogether, and kind of running up the stream or down the stream or whichever way you want to go. But then you have to then jump into the time stream and then match the flow of the river as you're then going down, which is the real problem. So one of the things about traveling into the past, which is interesting, is you can't really change it, because the past, everything that's building up to it is a point of consciousness. It's a point of agreement of everybody. So everybody, what's really happening is there's 6-7 billion people on the planet that are all holding hands, that are all walking backwards, that the minute we interact with the future, like the Buddha said, an apple's not an apple until you perceive it to be as such, that the future is literally being created at the moment that we interact with it, the moment we consciously interact with it all. But when you travel into the past, the reason you can't go back and kill Hitler and change anything is because Hitler just represents the very capstone of a pyramid of energy. So you shoot Hitler, and another guy takes his place, and then suddenly it's Heil Schmittler, and maybe Schmittler's worse than Hitler, because you have to change the consciousness. I mean, when I was doing all the prophecy stuff and predicting the future on, Art Bell's Coast to Coast, it got to the point where Art said, "Look, I don't want you making predictions anymore." And I said, "Why?" He says, "Because," I said, "you let Ed Dames come on every week and talk about the end of the world." And his exact words were, "We all know Ed's full of shit. The problem is whenever I let you on, whatever you say happens. And it's freaking me out. And I'm not so sure that you and I putting it into the consciousness of 26 million people is not making these events happen." So I said, well, that's kind of weird. They could just as easily not happen. I mean, I've been wrong plenty of times. But you have to go back in time and change the consciousness. If you and I took 1 million people back in time, which is why your work is so important, which is why my work is so important, of getting things out there to people. We're putting the seed. I mean, look what's happening now. If you turn on the news today, you'd think they were listening to Revolution Radio. I mean, I watched Sean Hannity and Brett Hume on Fox, and everything they were saying about Hillary Clinton is all the stuff that we've been saying for years, and finally it's floating up to the surface. Finally, people are getting it, and there's a revolt in the intelligence community to be able to stop this heinous criminal from becoming, one of the most powerful supervillains in the world. But it's all about changing and shifting the consciousness. The reason prophecy works the way it does is if I make a prophecy on this show, and I say, okay, there's going to be an earthquake tomorrow, and let's say a couple thousand people hear it, or however many millions you have listening to you, and there's an earthquake tomorrow. And then I come back and I say, okay, now this is going to happen, that's going to happen. And it ratchets up to more and more people actually seeing it. Then I say, okay, California's going to fall in the ocean, and everything's going to crack, and we're all going for the big swim, and we're all going to die. And the reason it doesn't happen is because I believe that you've changed enough minds, you've cracked enough hearts, and you've shaken enough booties to be able to actually have that experience not occur, because enough people are aware of it, and they go, well, we don't want that to happen, and they shift and change the wave of consciousness. So instead of running down the beach and throwing yourself into a wave where the wave just opens for you and then closes back up and hits the shore, you have to hit that wave with an equal and opposite wave. You have to make enough people aware of the doom that awaits them for them to be able to create the equal and opposite wave to make it stop. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. And on that note, my friend,
okay,
it's time for us to start wrapping this thing up.
Okay.
That was a fast 3 hours.
Thank you. It was fun. Thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate you.
Oh, thanks. Well, I don't get a chance to just riff about, stuff that I've done and things that I've influenced. And, I've been out there behind so many people and supporting so many things. And, I doubt any of the people that Art Bell said, look, I want to be you. I want your database. Give me everybody you know, and I'll put them on the show. And I was like, okay, here's my database. And all these people that got famous off coast to coast, they'll never know that, that I'm just back here in the background, just supporting people and trying to be nice and being polite and trying to just tell people, look, can't we just get along? That's why I don't want to talk about, these other people. They have their thing. They're not hurting anybody. If there's people out there that are just complete total morons that are just, letting off information that's just wrong, then yeah, I kind of get up on my hind legs a bit and say, look, you have a responsibility to the public, to not be an idiot, to not be a complete moron because you make the rest of us look bad. So, so there is that.
Well, I do appreciate that you've taken the time to do the homework and listen to a few of our episodes and said, hey, we got something going here, because to have you on the show, that means a lot, my friend, and I really appreciate it, and I hope we can do it again soon.
I'm your biggest fan.
Thank you so much. You hold on for a minute. I got to wrap this thing up, because on the Spaced Out Radio side, you got Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses, cranking A Little Brother Is Watching. Bumblefoot brings us in and out of every Spaced Out Radio episode. He is the official sound of this show. Tomorrow night, R. Keith Andrews, 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, the ET Connection. If you want to learn more about extraterrestrial contact, that's tomorrow night. Remember, if you want to listen to this episode or many of our others, you can go to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn, or download this show and others on iTunes. And also, don't forget to visit our website, spacedoutradio.com. We got a lot of cool shit on there, all for you. We're building it. We're going to make it bigger, better, and we got some really exciting additions coming up very, very soon. You guys stay very, very well. I will be back here in the hot seat of Uncle Jimbo's cabin in exactly 21 hours from now, ready to give you my best. Do me a favor. Tell a friend. Go on social media. Tell them to get their butts over here. We want to build this thing. I want to do this show 5 hours a night, but I need your help. I want to kick some ass here, people, but you, the listener, have to help me out. Let's do this together. We'll talk to you tomorrow night. Have a good one.